Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 157. It's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of episodes we've been doing. My name is NBZ. I'm joined, as per the usual, by my co-host. It is Bally. Hello Bally, how are you today?
Hi NBZ. I'm feeling very jealous of your celebrity experience
yes.
that you've had in the last few days.
I know, yeah. So those who don't know, I went along to the kind of funny World Tour meetup in London in the UK, and Greg Miller is a real man, and I have both shaken his hand and given him a hug. So it was it's a bit surreal. Very, very cool. A great experience. Met a lot of people there. Even some people who knew what the podcast was, which was fucking wild to me.
Shoutouts.
Shoutouts indeed. But yeah, I'd recommend people go along to things like that, because it's very rare that you get to talk to people who know anything about video games in the same amount of depth that we talk about a lot of times on this podcast. So it's.
But we're saying we're keen to do one day. We're just working out the best scenario to do it.
Sure, when we have 1 million followers on Twitter, maybe we'll have enough people to show up and say hello to us. That would be cool indeed. But yes, we are here, of course, to talk about the video games. And let's tell the fine folks what the run of show is for today, Bally.
First segment, we're going to be talking about a lot of games that we have been playing. Second segment is your listener emails. And the third segment, we are going to do a little bit of a preview of the Game Awards, which will be on December the 12th, which, lucky for me, is the same date as the UK general election. Which
means that Bally will be staying up all night anyway, so you might as well stay up and watch the Game Awards too.
Two birds with one stone. So
definitely.
Thank you, Jeff Keighley, for that.
Yeah, cheers, Jeff, for just taking your time for Bally and Bally alone to put it out on that day. Fantastic. So lots of video games have happened in recent times. We have obviously had a big deluge of Nintendo stuff over the past couple of months. Luigi's Mansion we talked a lot about last time, and
it's like 5 months in a row.
Yeah, it is. It's on the trot. And it leads up to this one, the big one, the Pokemon one, that has apparently sold 6 million copies in the first 3 days or something like that, which makes it the fastest selling Switch game of all time. And
do we know what that's like in comparison to other 3DS Pokemon games?
So Sun and Moon sold more, but Sun and Moon sold more off the back of the fact that, number one, 3DS install base was much larger, and number two, that was the year of Pokemon Go. So like you got a lot of hanger-oners, I'll say, like people who got back into Pokemon through Pokemon Go, who are then like, oh, I remember Pokemon, let's play the real one again. And I feel like probably a lot of those people that have stuck around, the fact that it is this popular, and obviously the Switch is this popular, makes it so that the game has done particularly well. So yeah, it came out. I've been playing it. It's been about a week or so. I am about 20 hours into the game. I got Pokemon Sword.
This is your first Pokemon, like, playing through the main game since
X and Y, I would say.
Y.
Yeah.
So it's been... You
only
missed one generation then.
I did technically only miss one generation, yeah. But for those of you who listen to the podcast and know the history that I have, obviously I was a competitive Pokemon YouTuber for like 7-8 years, and basically got burned the hell out with the entire thing, all of Pokemon, everything. And so I was like, I'm quitting, I'm done. Never coming back again.
Couldn't even look at Pikachu's face.
No, yeah, I slapped Pikachu's face, in fact. I said, get out, Pikachu, you don't belong here no more. And so it's an interesting experience for me, because I come from the perspective of someone who knows, like, I'm someone who looks at the Matrix and can see the image, right? Like, that point in the Matrix where it's like all ones and twos, and then people are like, I can see what's actually happening. That is me with Pokemon. I see the artifice, I see the everything.
You're a supercomputer.
I'm a supercomputer, almost, in that sense. And so, like, for me, one of my biggest problems with the series was once I understood how to play the competitive game, the single player became the most boring fucking thing in the world. Because when you can manipulate everything to that extent, it's just a cakewalk and there's no challenge. And in a lot of senses, those older games, like post-Gen 4, weren't doing too much interesting. Like, of course, there were new Pokemon and things like that, but like storytelling in Pokemon has never been good.
It's not to say that like I'm not against having a really easy RPG, but I at least expect a really solid story or a cool spectacle. And like,
or a
that's
world or
that
characters that you can latch
Sure.
onto. Like, the thing that I always go back to is, for me with JRPGs, it's the one genre where mechanics isn't number one on my list, right? Like, I prefer Xenoblade 1 and Persona 4 to Xenoblade 2 and Persona 5. Those sequels are both objectively, mechanically for me, better games. They're better experiences from a battle standpoint and from a lot of the system standpoint. But I still prefer those first two because the world, the characters, and the storytelling vibed with me so much more. And that's what I remember from those experiences, right? And I don't think you can say the same about Pokemon. Pokemon has never had that appeal. And obviously, growing up as kids, we were into Pokemon for the reasons of we liked collecting monsters and, evolving things and battling people and things like that.
And it does feel like a cool adventure, like at the time, because we hadn't been exposed to many other RPGs in a similar way. And I think
Totally.
that's where you can find much more deep, interesting stories in RPGs now, where Pokemon just hasn't caught up for a whole multitude of reasons.
Well, it's always been a game for kids, right? And it never will be anything but that, in my opinion, in terms of just someone playing through the game itself. The thing that's interesting about Pokemon is, like, you talk to people about competitive Pokemon, I don't think a lot of people understand the depth to which that shit goes, right? It's like chess, but more complicated. And with so many different variables and possibilities. So it's an interesting game because on the one hand, it is directly marketed at younger audiences, but the people who are fans and who grew up with the series have something else to latch onto. Like, Pokemon is kind of Disney-esque, like Pixar-esque in that way, because it does appeal to such this wide audience of people.
I think Greg Miller made the point, or it might have been someone else on the podcast, he was saying the older generation that it appeals to are actually just the people who grew up with Pokemon, and now that they're older, they still play it, and that it's not really appealed to a group outside of that.
If you come to Pokemon after you are past your childhood, I find that those people who I've heard talk about it have a really tricky time getting into the series.
And they're disappointed, yeah.
And don't really see what the hype is and don't really understand why people like the series. So for sure, I think that is definitely an interesting one because there are so many people in games media. The thing that I find with a lot of the podcasts I listen to and people who I follow is either they grew up with Pokemon and are an enormous
basically,
fan.
are they our age or younger or our age and above? Because we're almost like we're the first generation. We're like the cutoff, more or less. And that's quite interesting.
Yes, we are the cutoff point. So yeah, if you never grew up with Pokemon, you just don't understand it and you've never been into it, right? Even people who are big Nintendo fans, like I think of people like Dan Reichert, who a huge Nintendo fan, doesn't really.
Yeah, and he's like a little bit older than us, yeah.
Yeah, totally. So all that preamble, right, to get to this new game, Pokemon Sword. And it's interesting because I think the Pokemon Company, in terms of their marketing around the release, have been much more close to the vest. They didn't show the evolutions for all three starters before the game came out, which is something they've done in the past, right? Like as part of their strategy with their marketing. And they didn't really show that many new Pokemon. Like, there are a few, like they had Corviknight out there pretty early on. Obviously, the three starters they always show off. But I struggled to really find that much about the game until it got leaked. And then I was like, I just don't want to see anything because for me, I kind of wanted to go into this game like I've never done with a Pokemon before. And I was talking to you about this. I don't think I have ever gone into a Pokemon game not knowing all the Pokemon in there, because the first generation was just this cultural phenomenon. So you watched the anime, you had the card game. So I got familiar with Pokemon before I even played the video game and knew everyone. Before Gold and Silver came out, I got this giant book from like Waterstones that literally showed, it was really like knockoff art, so it wasn't official artwork in any way, but because the games had been out in Japan, like they were just selling all these things, and I saw all the Pokemon before it came out. You know, I was back in the day where people didn't know what Marill was called, so they call it Peekaboo, and I think that book, I could probably dig it up from home. I feel like it has a lot of fake names in there, or like Japanese translated to English names that aren't really the English names that they ended up having, which is kind of wild. And then, you know, from that point onwards, I remember our friend Ali T, before Diamond and Pearl came out, he knew the 6 Pokemon that was going to be his team because we were on Cerebi and like we had all the information. So this legitimately is the first time going into a Pokemon game where I have had zero idea what any of the new Pokemon are. And what I have to say is that is the best thing about this game. By far, to me, the joy of just seeing something evolve or just seeing something in the wild or someone else use it is amazing. Because Pokemon, I've looked at it from a certain perspective for so long that I kind of forgot the joy of just seeing a new creature for the first time. And I think that Sun and Moon didn't have like an amazing set of new Pokemon for you to experience. You kind of had
There's some cool ones, but yeah, I mean, I had a very similar experience in that I didn't know much about Sun and Moon. I barely knew any Pokemon going in. I played it blind. It was my first Pokemon since Diamond and Pearl, I think, and so I've had a fairly similar experience. And I really did enjoy Pokemon Sun for those reasons. But eventually it did get to a point where it was like, yeah, but now this is Pokemon and I know what I'm doing. And
you felt like you were going through the motions, yeah?
Felt a bit like going through the motions. Stale is a strong word, but it felt like a bit, right, I've had the fun of getting back into this, but now I'm back into it. It is through the motions and it is quite that. And I'm interested if, now that I think you said you were at the 6th gym, are you now feeling like you're back in the motions, or like was the start of the game feeling more fresh than the latter half?
I don't know what it is about this game, but for some reason I am fucking loving this game.
Is it the region?
Right, so that's the other thing to bring up, is part of the reason I jumped back into Pokemon is because this region that the game is set in, Galar, is based on the UK, right? And as we've said, I think that my opinion of Forza Horizon 4 is higher because I can drive around Edinburgh in Forza Horizon 4, right? Like, I don't think I would have played that game if I wasn't able to do that. Having representation of the place that you live in a video game is really cool, and it just doesn't happen that often with the UK for us. Like, it's going to happen again next year. Watch Dogs Legion is based in London, which is awesome, and I think
Untitled Goose Game this year as well.
Right, you could technically say it's like set in a UK village of some type, but it's just the little things, right? So seeing a post box, like a red post box, or James Turner, the art director, talked about this stuff in some of the Game Informer did some coverage before the game came out, and he was talking about the signs and how the development team was putting up, when you're out in the UK and like there are signpost boards and things like that with tourist information and things like things like that on them. He was saying a lot of the development team was putting up signs that looked more medieval in nature, and he was like, that's not actually like in modern UK. That's not what signs look like. Like they have this particular style to them, structure, and so like the red signboards that you see around the world feel very much like something you would see in the UK when you go to historic sites or things like that. And so it's those little touches, like having those embellishments that call to the UK itself, really invest me a lot more in terms of this region and the place. What I will say is like it looks a lot larger than it actually is. So you get to towns where you will see these vast flowing fields. One of my favourite things that I've seen is when you're driving around Scotland or middle of the UK or England to some extent, the way fields are set up are very distinct in this country. They all have kind of different shades of colour to them. They're all at weird kind of angles. They're not that uniform, and they're not always like the same shape or size, but
yeah, there's less space, so I agree. It's something I notice a lot, like in the States where there's just expanses of space. It means that the fields are much more uniform, and then in this country it's much more higgledy-piggledy because of just landowners and the borders.
But also like there's lots of mountainous areas or hilly areas where that stuff is necessitated, and so you see these rolling hills in the background, and it is pretty much identical to what you would see in terms of like farming land or like pasture for animals. So those little parts are definitely helping. I wouldn't say that it necessarily means the game is a better game because of it, but I think because my experience as being a British person definitely endears me to the world a bit more. So
what's the openness like? And this is the first Pokemon game, I believe, with the camera that you can like move 360.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because this game seems to, in some senses, expand the scale of Pokemon. It seems like this is the first console game that you can play on a TV. The world has to look a lot larger and feel a lot bigger. And that's kind of what I was getting at with the towns, right? It's like they look a lot larger. They're not actually that much larger. Like it is kind of mind-boggling to me that you go back to Gen 1 and you look at the towns there, and each house you go into, you can't really interact with anything. Like, you can turn on a TV, you can search through a bin, but you talk to a person, and they're not really a character. They're more like they're a vessel for the game to give you information about the world. Unlike something like Dragon Quest XI, where I run around the town, and each character gave me a sense of that world, and their place in it, and that they were a person. Whereas none of these feel like people, and still, to this day, NPCs in Pokemon don't feel like real people, because they'll have one line they say that feels completely out of context of anything, and doesn't make it feel like they live in this world, right? It just doesn't have that cohesion to it. So it's mind-blowing. You go into these houses that all look the exact same, copy-pasted with a couple of different things. Sometimes there's Pokemon sitting on the sofa, sometimes they're in different areas. And I really like the design of those places and those spaces. But the only thing you can do is turn on the TV, or you can talk to someone, and they say that one line, or they'll give you an item. A lot of the items in this game, so much of this game feels like a delivery mechanism to get you all the things you need to play competitive Pokemon, right? Because someone will give you a wide lens, or a focus sash, or a choice scarf, and all the secrets and hidden things in the world feel like either they're a TM that you're going to need, or they're going to be an item that can be used in competitive, or something of that nature, and not necessarily something you would use or would be useful to a regular player who's just playing the game. So a lot of the pickups feel that way, because at this point there are so many of those types of things. Like, think about Arceus. Arceus has 15 different plates it needs, because to transform into all its different forms it needs like the fairy plate, or the dark plate, or the grass plate. And I found the fairy plate, and I'm thinking to myself, God, like, if this is one item in the world, I need at least 15, 16 more items that are just plates for Arceus, right? So I think for a lot of players, some of that discovery of finding a thing won't be as exciting, because they're like, a focus sash, like, if you just use that in the game, it's going to get used up, and then you lose the item, and it's a one-time use thing. That thing is specifically built for competitive play. So talking about the nature of the game being more open, that comes to pass with the wild area mainly.
So that's one area, the wild area.
One large area, and so the structure of this game is interesting because it's built in loops. So the first loop, this almost feels like Ocarina of Time. The first loop is the wild area is kind of in the center, and there are routes that go around it.
I was about to ask, is it just like Hyrule Field?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have that same impact, like we've seen stuff like this before in video games for years and years, so it's maybe in that sense it's not going to blow your mind, but you use the second stick to control the camera, which is something you can't do in the rest of the game. And so it's this weird thing when you're on a regular route.
It's the only part of the game where...
Yes.
Oh my God, right.
Exactly.
I hadn't realised.
Right, so when you go into a town, it's a fixed perspective on that town, or a route. It's a fixed perspective on the route, so you can't actually swing the camera anywhere. Whereas in the wild area you can. So there is this kind of weird disconnect that happens sometimes, where you'll move from one space to the other, and I tried to move the stick, but it doesn't do anything. So it feels a little jarring. So that area is really cool. I spent a lot of time in that area when I first started the game, because for the first time, right, I don't know what Sun and Moon was like, but story-wise, it feels like Pokemon has been trending in this direction of, we're doing more and more cutscenes, we're focusing more and more on legendaries and mythology and world-ending stakes and things like that. For the first time since Gold and Silver, probably, this game is just about a journey of being the best Pokemon trainer. It's about beating a gym challenge, and that's pretty much it. There's a little bit of a legendary thing set up at the very start of the game, but outside of that, it's pretty straightforward. So the thrust of this game for me has really been that amazing joy of discovery, of finding new Pokemon, and having the game kind of let go. because the game still has a bit of hand-holdiness to it. You'll always walk out of a gym and like Sonya will be there, who's the daughter of the professor in this game, and she's on her own journey. So she's the one who's kind of doing a little bit of the mythology of the world, like legendary stuff, but it's light. It's not too like in-depth or anything. So she'll be there to have a conversation with you, or one of your rivals will pop up. There's like 3 rivals, and they each represent kind of a different version of Pokemon. Like Hop is the worst. He's like the really nice best friend idiot guy who picks instead of being the traditional rival who picks the starter who's strong against you, he picks the one that's weak against you, which just gives you an easy time just rolling over him the whole game. And he kind of feels like the kind of protagonist they brought in X and Y, which was, we're all friends, really, and we're rivals, but we're really, actually really good friends, and it's kind of just like a friendly rivalry thing, versus like Gold and Silver, where that dude was literally an asshole. Like, he was a fucking dick. And Gary was also kind of a dick, like less so than, redhead dude in Gold and Silver. But there is a rival in this game
who we've forgotten the name of because we just called him all sorts of swear words at the time.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I called him fuck. Like, that was what I did. Or there was a lot of people I saw who just called him question mark because that's what they say, and then they thought that was what his name was, which is very weird. But there's a rival who is more similar to that type of rival as well, called Bede, who is just a complete asshole, which I like. I appreciate that they've brought that back into the series, although I do think he's going to go on a heel turn, kind of actually become your friend, whatever, because, it's kind of the way they've been going. And then there's another trainer who... She's the one who has the team, and the team's not like an evil dominating team. They're just basically football hooligans. They're fans of her. So her name is Marnie, and I think she's Welsh. Like, it feels like the dialect is written in a sense that if you spoke it with a Welsh accent, all those kind of...
Have there been any Scottish references yet?
Some music. There's a bit of a northern part of the wild area which feels like there's bagpipes in there. I'm not 100% sure. But I haven't really come across too many Scottish dialects yet. There's a lot of...
I mean, maybe they're just saving it for the end, like the final jump, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of London slang, like ding, ding, ding. Hello, editing NVZ here. I keep saying London slang, which isn't really the right term for it. It's Cockney rhyming slang. So whenever I say London slang in this episode, just... imagine I'm talking about Cockney rhyming slang, because the actual phrase didn't come to my mind at the moment. Cool, back to the show. Ding, ding, ding. Hop at one point said I'm cream crackered, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm on board with Hop now, because that was real good. But he also is like mate all the time. He'll always drop mate into a sentence. So they have taken care, I think, in terms of, like, a lot of it is a little bit stereotypical, but I'm kind of there for it, I'm fine with him using, London slang. It's kind of good in that way. And so that said, right, all this expansion and making the game larger, having the wild area, there are jarring elements to it. The opening cutscene is like, because this game, in terms of the gym challenge, they're all like big football arenas, and so you have a huge crowd watching you when you're fighting the gym leader. And of course, the Dynamaxing, which is kind of the gimmick of this game, is all about making the huge Pokemon so the arena gets filled with these giant things, like smashing each other in the face. This game feels like it should have voice acting, because the game opens on this grand cutscene with the chairman of the Pokemon League, and he's standing in this huge arena, and like there's a sound of crowd, and like there's music, and then you feel like someone's gonna shout out loud and like give this real big speech, and then it's like silence, and it's just text on the screen, and it just flops immediately. It just has all this build up, and there's no voice acting. And it's really weird. Like, it really just threw me off. A similar thing just happened. I just beat the 6th gym, and the gym leader is a rock star almost. He's on stage, like, performing a concert, and you see his mouth moving and him moving around, and there's nothing coming out of it. Like, there's this really weird bedded music underneath, and there's like a crowd around him, but there's nothing. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing, Game Freak? It's really weird. And I do think that's just, it's like Nintendo generally, where they are so reticent to push forward with stuff like voice acting. They're almost afraid of it in a way, because I don't think they're particularly good at it, games like Breath of the Wild, where they did try, but to be frank, the voice acting in that game, like a character like Mipha especially, god awful, like really rough in terms of the voice acting department. And there are rare instances where they get it right. Like, I've talked so much about the original Xenoblade Chronicles, how well that localization was handled and how good the voice acting is in that game. Or Kid Icarus Uprising. And they do have these examples in recent times where they've done a good job. Pokemon feels like a series where it's so big. Like, that's the thing, and I think that's the complaint so many people have, is this game feels like it should be this enormous step forward, like Nintendo have been doing with a lot of their franchises. But it's not. And so many people are angry about the game, right? Like Dexit and like the model, they're like, oh, they didn't really do the models and all this bullshit that the stupid internet gets angry about. Like, clearly that vocal minority didn't change a thing because this game sold better than anything on Switch so far. And I do see where some people are coming from in terms of wanting the series to evolve, wanting to be bigger, but Game Freak are not equipped to do that, right? This is the first, aside from Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which was a much smaller scope game because it's built on the foundation of something they've already made multiple times. It's really their step into HD development for the first time. And you think about the studio, who their entire history has been on handheld platforms with the DS and 3DS and GBA and all these consoles, which are low power and don't require art assets at such a high fidelity. To make that essentially making a jump from 3DS to Switch is kind of like going from GameCube to like 360. I guess that's a bad comparison. Maybe like it's almost like it's this middle era between N64 and GameCube to full like post 360. Like almost it's weird because Switch is like middle between last generation and this generation. But it's a huge leap. It's a real big jump for a studio like that. And that studio is really small. Like they make one of the biggest games in the world, but they're really small and they haven't expanded because I think that some studios don't like to do that because it changes their culture or whatever, and it makes it the way they approach games different.
But you look at a game like Dragon Quest XI, where it is much more open. It's still colourful. It's still aimed at a pretty family-friendly audience in the same way Pokemon is, and you just have to step back and realise that Square Enix have been doing this for a very long time, and they have a much bigger budget for these kinds of things. And it's just like wanting Pokemon to be something like that. You can want it, sure, but they're not in a position to ever deliver that without substantial change and,
Right. Or if Nintendo are saying, okay, we need another development studio working on this, but I think the problem is so many of these decisions come down from the Pokemon Company. And the Pokemon Company we talked about before, it's just a weird fracture of all these different entities vying for control of the franchise. And I think in the Pokemon Company's mind, they're the people who deal with the finances. And if they are looking at Game Freak and seeing them make a game like this, which doesn't really move the needle in terms of innovation or anything particularly grandiose, and it still sells this much, and it continues to sell this much, there is literally zero reason for them to commit to that. The reason Breath of the Wild had to do something so bold was because Skyward Sword, on an install base of 100 million Wiis, sold 3 million copies.
But even Zelda, like Nintendo, no matter how successful the last Zelda was, they might make a sequel to a successful Zelda, absolutely, like a Majora's Mask or, that kind of thing. But Mario and Zelda, in terms of Nintendo franchises, they choose to constantly reinvent them on purpose, regardless almost sometimes of how successful the previous one was.
Yeah, no, that's true. And it is interesting because Nintendo has the dichotomy of they've got series like Animal Crossing and Pokemon that stay the same, whereas series like Mario and Zelda constantly change.
Yeah, and even something like Fire Emblem has become slightly more iterative.
Yeah, Fire Emblem's kind of in this in-between area where it's like not quite as bold.
Yeah, and I think a lot of their series are in between, like a Luigi's Mansion, it's a bit in between.
Sure, yeah. So again, like I've been taking a long way around this, kind of talking about a lot of different aspects about how they're making the game larger and feel larger. What I'll say is because they do take off the reins for pretty early in the game, maybe it's an hour in or maybe an hour and a half that you get to the wild area, that freedom I haven't felt in a Pokemon game for such a long time. Just huge space, run into something that's really high level, and it could just fuck you over. Like, it could just murder your whole team and you're done for.
That's very much like another traditional RPG.
Yeah, totally. It's like Xenoblade Chronicles, like on Gower Plains, and you run into that giant fucking, like, pig thing, and it's, like, level 90, and you're like, well, I'm fucked, I'm just gonna die and go over to this other place. And I really appreciated that, because the wild area is big. It feels a little barren, right? Like, of course it does, but there are different sections. Like, you'll go to an area where it's raining, or it'll be hailing. Like, the weather systems are kind of built around it. And so here's the core change to Pokemon. The grass is no longer random. Obviously, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee made all the Pokemon visible on the map. This game does a bit of a compromise situation where you get to a patch of grass and you'll see maybe 3 different types of Pokemon hopping about. Like, there'll be a Hoot, there'll be like an Octillery, there'll be like a Snorunt. They'll all be like running around, but there'll also be patches of grasses that shake, or like have an exclamation mark pop up for them. And in those, you'll often find Pokemon that you can't see on the map itself. Like, they just won't show up on the map ever, but they'll be kind of hidden within the grass. So it is a sense that you don't need to worry about running through grass and getting random encounters. It's kind of taken that away, which I appreciate, because I think that a lot of people got frustrated with that system. It's a thing from RPGs that I think needs to go away generally, and Pokemon was one of the last bastions that was still doing it. Like, at this point, Dragon Quest shows all the enemies on the map, and Final Fantasy's always been doing different things. Like, that game is much more action-based at this point, so it's very different. But, like, Octopath Traveler is one that actually regresses somewhat, because it keeps random battles. And I was a little bit surprised with Octopath Traveler that it didn't adopt a Bravely Default mode, where in Bravely Default you could turn off random encounters, or you could turn them really high up. Like, there was like a literal switch in Bravely Default that allowed you to change the frequency of random encounters. So if you were going through a dungeon and you got to a boss and then you died and you're like, oh, I've got to go through the whole fucking dungeon again, at least in Bravely Default you could just turn off all the encounters and just get straight to the boss again. So for me, it's a good change, because it catches your eye. You're like, oh, there's a Pokemon I've not seen before, so like a new one, and you can go and catch it. But then you feel like you want to hang around the area. Like, it incentivizes you by saying, okay, here are the Pokemon you can see, but like, hang around a bit, and maybe you'll find something that you've not seen before that's hidden in the grass. And I didn't actually realize that was a system. I thought it was only the Pokemon that were showing up that I could catch. I didn't realize that the kind of question marks popping up, because I thought the question marks were from the Pokemon themselves that are already there. I didn't realize until maybe, I don't know, 10 hours in that was the case. So I probably missed a bunch of Pokemon in the early areas. And the weird thing is, I feel motivated to go back to those places and find them, because they could be things I've never seen before. There's certainly a lot of surprise in just... I think the quality generally, in terms of the new stuff, has been really high from what I've seen. My entire team thus far is comprised of totally new things, and I love it. It's got a great diversity in terms of my typing, and I love a lot of the new designs. They're so weird, and some of them are just... they feel like the sort of thing that you haven't seen recently in Pokemon. Like Sun and Moon, I look at, and there's so many like weird bugs that don't have too much personality, or like a lot of... because I'm coming across some Sun and Moon Pokemon as well, and I'm like, there is a distinct difference, I think, in the quality of the designs from Sun and Moon to the quality in Sword and Shield. I do think it's a step up from my experience. And I love that I still don't know so much. I have been spoiled by some things, because Twitter, as soon as the game comes out, like, you have maybe a 1 day to 2 day window before people are like, fuck it, here's what I'm, like, posting videos of the Pokemon camp and stuff like that. So it takes a little bit of that magic away, because I have been spoiled on some things. But still, like, I came across something last night and I was like, what the fuck is that? You know, like, it's great to just have that instant reaction, and I think it's something that I was missing from the franchise, which I didn't realize I was missing it until I decided to play the game this way. But yeah, the game feels so much more streamlined. There are, in terms of your inventory, everything's, they've kind of refined it over the years, but they've now got a category that a lot of other RPGs have, which is like, sell this shit, basically. It's an inventory that's called treasure, and you pick up a bunch of items that you can literally just sell for money, and you don't need to worry about anything else with them. They don't do anything else, and you can just sell them and make a bunch of cash. And cash is interesting in this game because there's a lot of customization. You can buy hoodies and shirts and hats and all these different things. And I love the customization. One of those other reasons that I chose to play as a female character as opposed to a male character is that I feel like you just get so many better options as a female character in games like this in terms of, things that you can put on your character. So that's why I went that route, because I just think it's more interesting and there's more fun things that you can, buy and wear and everything. And I've been constantly going into the shops and spending money and like changing my look depending on the area. So I was recently in a snow town and I was wearing, I had like a skirt and some other like t-shirt on, and I get to this cold town, I'm like, kind of feel like I'm cold in this area. So I went to the shop and like bought like one of those Russian style hats that's really warm, and like a hoodie and like some gloves and things like that. So I am styling myself around the area, which is something I didn't expect I would be doing, but for whatever reason, the customization stuff is really hitting with me. And then you have just this freedom of movement as well, with they give you the ability to just fly almost instantly. Removal of TM has been a thing has been a thing for a while, right? Like Sun and Moon didn't have any of that stuff in it, did it?
No, there's like Pokemon that, how do you explain it? Like, yeah, you can just do it with a Pokemon that it doesn't count as in being in your team anytime, essentially.
Right,
like flying, surfing.
So there's always a Lapras you have on hand that you can use to traverse water. Yeah, this streamlines it even more because your bicycle is very multi-purpose. So you can be riding your bike on land and you can literally just ride it straight into the water. And
that's really cool.
It instantly transforms into a water bicycle. And that change is huge, because you think about like the time wasted where previous games, like think about Red and Blue, you walk up to the water, open the menu, click on Pokemon, click on the Pokemon that has the HM, press the HM, say, do you really want to use this on the water? Yes, now you're on the water. That is a world of difference to now you're just literally treating it like another piece of land, you're just going onto it. And I think there's a little bit of personality taken out of the game in terms of, like, when you're flying to places, this feels like a cut corner, like something that they never do in the other Pokemon games, is there's always an animation that you hop on a Pokemon and you fly away. There's no animation. It literally goes to a menu and, like, blanks and you're just there. Like, it's basically fast travel. Even though they put it under the guise of, like, it's the Corviknight taxi service. And I'm like, oh, this will be a cool cutscene of Corviknight picking me up. But actually, like, it loses the personality, but also I think it's done probably in favor of streamlining, because you don't have to load a cutscene every time. You can just warp there instantly. So I'm a little bit split on that, but in terms of just moving around the place, it's so much easier. And I think one of the most interesting things about this game, I think it is so geared towards the competitive mindset in terms of making things so much more easy and open for people to look at. Like, you can do infinite vitamins. So you remember back when you're EV training in Diamond and Pearl, there was a maximum cap in terms of like protein and calcium and stuff like that. You could feed a Pokemon, you could feed them 20 calcium, but after 10 it would stop doing anything. The maximum was 100 EVs that you could gain from giving them that stuff. Now it's infinite. You can give them as many as you want and you can max out at 252.
Wow.
Technically
essentially just breeding for IVs, then you're not actually EV training. You're just...
I mean, you don't need to. I don't know how expensive all that stuff is, but seemingly you can just use vitamins to max out stats, or just like get EVs where you need them to be without having to grind it out in any way. And obviously, there's that kind of stuff gets a bit more messed up because there's now the system where there's no option to turn off XP share, which, fuck me, man. People in the Pokemon community who are angry about this shit, I do not understand you in any fucking way. Like, if this was any other RPG, like the game I always bring up, Octopath Traveler, where it fucking doesn't level you with your party members, this should be a feature of every goddamn RPG. I hate it when they leave party members behind or someone is really underleveled, because it just lessens your ability to use everyone, right? One of the amazing things about Chrono Trigger is that party levels with you all the time. And so you feel like you should change your party up and experiment. Whereas with games like Pokemon in the past, it's like you feel like you have to stick to your core team of 6. And in this game, I've been able to, like, all my Pokemon are at, like, level 25, and I got a new one, and I was like, oh, this thing seems cool, but it was level 1. But its typing was awesome. Like, it was Poison Electric, and I'm like, that's great typing. I want to use that thing. And so I popped it in my party, And it just sat there for the whole game, and now it's caught up. Now it's the same level as everybody else because of the XP share, and I can legitimately do that now, which is really good. Like, the streamlining continues because you have Pokemon boxes accessible anywhere. So I can just be anywhere and just swap things out of my box. I don't need to go to a Pokemon Center. The Pokemon Center has a guy at the counter who will change your nickname and be the move relearner. None of this heart scale bullshit. No having to grind to get heart scales to go to a guy to relearn a move, and you have limited ones that you can do, and it's like treated like a precious resource. You can just do it. You can just rename anything. You can just relearn any move, no matter what. It's that flexibility, and that is the thing. This game's strength more than anything is that freedom and flexibility in every aspect. It really wants the player to have a smooth time. And remove all barriers in terms of so many of these aspects. So I've been loving it. I think it's just... And I like the world a lot. You know, I do think the towns are barren, but there will be... You know, I talk about how you walk into these rooms and there's nothing there. I walked into a room in a hotel area in the snowy town, and I walk in on basically a Sherlock Holmes-style detective guy who's trying to figure out a mystery of who ate the berries. And there's these 3 suspects standing there. And, like, you talk to all of them. And, like, it's this little mini cutscene that happens. And it's this random room in this hotel. And if I didn't go there, I would have missed it. So it feels like that little carrot on the stick to be like, yeah, I probably should still explore everywhere, because some random NPC will give me a choice band, and all this stuff I'll get eventually for snooping around and finding hidden items and things that are all over the place. So
nice.
So yeah, it feels worthwhile to do that stuff. Another streamlining thing I only figured out yesterday, they no longer lose health if they're poisoned when you're running around. You can run around, and I don't know if they added that in Sun and Moon. They might have done, but
I don't think I could ever tell, and it might have been the case that it just didn't.
I decided to figure out... Well, I got poisoned and I didn't heal myself straight away, so I was like, well, I wonder if I'm going to get like what the screen will look like when it does the kind of like losing health.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen, and I opened my menu and I rode around a bit and I was like, nope, my health is still the same. So it doesn't do that anymore, which, sure, like that was kind of a bullshit thing in RPGs all over the years, that poison would hurt you. Like, I don't think it really added any strategy, really. It was just an annoying thing that you just were like, fuck, just get me to the Pokemon Center already.
Yeah.
But yeah, and there's lots of other aspects that I haven't touched on, things like Dynamaxing and the raid battles, which I've done a little bit of. They seem like ways for you to get Pokemon. Like, there's the difference between Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing. Dynamaxing is just they're big, like they're just big Pokemon. Gigantamaxing is they're big, but also they look different. So one of the new Pokemon, Alcremie, which is like a cream Pokemon, and to evolve it, you have to, like, to evolve the thing that it evolves into, you have to spin your trainer around in a circle like you're mixing a bowl of, you know, cake mixture or whatever. It's real. There's some real stupid ways that Pokemon have evolved over the years. Like in, was it X and Y with Malamar, where you had to hold your 3DS upside down while they leveled up. Yeah, so you had to literally hold your 3DS upside down while they leveled up in order to evolve, because the Pokemon was all about topsy-turvy and like upside down stuff. So they have those random ways of evolving. I lost my train of thought completely. But yeah, so Gigantamax, and that was what I was talking about. So it changes their form. And so Alcremie just turns into this giant wedding cake instead of its regular form. So I don't know what that does. I'm sure it has some competitive aspects. I've been seeing some people say some stuff online, like if you Dynamax and also have a choice item, you're no longer locked into your choice, which seems fucking broken, right? Like a choice banded thing that isn't locked in and also is Dynamax and also gets the boost from the choice band while also being able to freely choose its moves. That seems a little bit ridiculous. So I think that Smogon and Places are going to be doing some complex bans on some of those things, because they, like, if Nintendo allow those things in competitions, it's like, what's even the point? Everyone's going to rock up with choice items on everything and Dynamaxing the shit out of it. So that seems
so. You
crazy.
can Dynamax anything, but you can only Gigantamax some things. Is that right?
Well, yeah. So only certain Pokemon have different forms. So like Charizard has a different form that's Gigantamax version, or Alcremie has one that's so not every Pokemon has an alternate form. Some of them do, and you have to catch a Pokemon that has the ability to Gigantamax. So certain, I have a Pokemon that could Gigantamax into a different form, but I don't think it's a Gigantamax variant of it. Like, I'd have to catch a Gigantamax specific one in order to do it.
Okay.
So yeah, that's basically how it works. And yeah, the raid battles, I haven't been able to connect with any other real human, so I've just had NPCs. Seems like some weird online stuff with the wild area. Apparently, I tried it a little bit, and I realized this, but if you turn on Wi-Fi, or you turn on the internet connection in the wild area, you'll see people in your game just running around the wild area. You can't really interact with them, they'll be running around. But what it also does is it fucking tanks the frame rate. Like, real bad frame rate problems if you have online enabled while you're in the wild area. Otherwise, the game runs really nicely. It looks really nice. I have actually been quite struck by the soundtrack. The music is really good, like in a way that Pokemon music hasn't been for a while. The gym battle soundtrack is fantastic.
Proper good metal rock songs.
Yeah, and also that wild area, like I was telling you, the bagpipes. There's this really good track that has what I think is bagpipes in like the northern area of the wild area map, and really good stuff. I think that it's a step up in terms of the quality of the soundtrack. Definitely has improved quite a bit. But yeah, I mean, it's weird, right? Because fundamentally it's Pokemon. It's not doing anything new. It's not doing anything different. It's still bare bones story-wise. And yeah, I still really like it. I'm still enjoying myself a lot. There's a joy to having, like, not being the person anymore who just bashes through the story to get to the end so I can play competitive, because that's what I did for 5th gen and for 6th gen, and it just kind of sucked the fun out of the game, right? Like, it really just I haven't played a Pokemon like this since I played Blue or Gold and Silver, where all I'm doing is finding things I want to catch, leveling things up. I feel a compulsion to complete the Pokedex, and I've never done that before. I know you did it, obviously, back in 3rd gen, but there is something about the limited nature of the Pokedex that actually makes it feel achievable. Like, if they had put everything in this game, I don't think that would have crossed my mind, but it feels a bit more achievable this time. So yeah, I'm definitely into it. Shout out to Ball Guy. Ball Guy is an best fucking NPC in this game. He is a man who looks like he has the skin color of the Wii Fit trainer, like that weird grey skin, and his head is a fucking cartoon Pokeball. Like, he has giant eyes, and his head is just a fucking Pokeball.
Why?
I don't know. He's like a mascot. And you talk to him when you go to a gym challenge, and he gives you a new Pokeball. It's really weird. He's fucking creepy as hell, but I love him. It's weird. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's not really... I could keep talking about different aspects, but I think I kind of got across my point that, this game is a lot of fun. It's
Pokemon, but it's quite a bit more fun you're having with
Pokemon,
it than you
but
thought you might have.
Yeah, totally. I am really into the game. I'm taking my time with it, just soaking it all in. I'm loving it. It's great. So, yeah. I feel like I got a lot said there. Let's move on to the next game, which, Bally, you have been playing quite a bit of.
I beat a co-op game with Caroline that came out very recently on the Switch, exclusive to the Switch. That is The Stretchers, which is made by Tarsier Studios, who apparently are Swedish and have worked on Little Nightmares.
Yeah, which came out on Switch recently, I think.
Oh, really?
It's like a 2D, it's like a horror 2D platformer. It's like scarier than Inside, so that's like Inside is kind of my level of intensity. And yeah, I've seen some stuff from Little Nightmares. I'm like, I don't think I want to play this.
They also worked on Tearaway Unfolded on PS4 and Little Big Planet.
Did they really?
Little Big Planet 3 and Little Big Planet on Vita.
Oh, wow, okay.
And the DLC for 2, so...
Huh, well, it seems like I've played quite a lot from them then, in that case.
Yeah, and in a way you do kind of notice that there's a lot of those ragdoll physics that happen in a game like Little Big Planet that you do see in this game, and Little Nightmares. Not that I've played that game either, but
so give me the setup for this game.
So
I'm sure this game got announced really recently, and it was interesting because it feels like another situation like we had at the launch of the Switch with Snipperclips, where it's Nintendo partnering with an indie studio and publishing this game.
Yeah.
And it's a co-op focused game as well, similar to Snipperclips.
So you play as two medics who have the ability to carry a stretcher. You can also carry stuff without your stretcher. And the aim of the game is to drive your ambulance to these locations, and then you basically work together to put what are called dizzies. So dizzies are just people who have been dizzied essentially by
are they sick or are they knocked out?
They've been like they've just looked at this guy's hat. The main villain in the game wears this hat that makes people dizzy.
Okay.
And it basically knocks them out and turns them into essentially like a corpse, but they're just a knocked out body that you have to move from wherever you find them into your ambulance. And then
so it's kind of like justification for them like ragdolling all over the place.
That's an excuse for them to be ragdolled without being corpses, and then taking them back to the hospital to de-dizzify them.
Okay.
So it starts out quite simple, and you just might see you drive your ambulance. I should say you drive the ambulance in like this open world, and then when you get there, you get out, and then all of a sudden the level becomes locked, and you've got 12 minutes like to get the bonus points for that level, and you have to load up the normally 5 or 6 people onto your ambulance, and then you drive to the hospital. So
and I'm right in saying that like if you get multiple people on the stretcher at once and then feed them into the ambulance, you get like bonus points for getting like 5 in a row or whatever.
You get loads of points. So me and Caroline's strategy was, let's pile up a big pile of bodies, and then we're just going to get our stretcher and sweep through all of them. And there's like this neat, like almost magnetic feeling to the stretcher when you're carrying it, that they will kind of flip themselves onto it. And you get like fat people as well as like slimmer people, and the fat people you need 2 people to actually just move them at all, whereas the slimmer people, 1 person can just drag them without the stretcher. But the stretcher's like really, you can move much faster when you carry them on the stretcher. So as the puzzles get tougher and there's more obstacles, but I mean the obstacles, like you get, say I'm on like a building site and there's like a swinging crane or something, and they do get more and more intense and faster. If I get hit by this swinging crane, I get minus 10 points, but I guess the other downside is I get launched like to the other side of the level often, and like this really hilarious like slapstick just ragdoll effect, which happens to the 2 characters you play as when you get hit.
Is that bad because you get rated on how fast you do it as well? Is there a time bonus?
No, that's the thing. You've normally got your 12 or 15 minutes, whatever, for the time bonus, and that's worth 10,000 points. And if you don't get that, you don't get that. The level plays on. It's not like there's a time limit.
Yeah.
And you get like minus 10 points for getting hit by, say, like an animal or a swinging plank or something.
Is there any incentive to actually do well in terms of point
exactly.
structure?
That's what I'm saying.
Because for me, like me and you, we didn't grow up in the era of like Space Invaders and shit, where the reason you got high scores was to brag about it to friends. Like this doesn't seem like a game like that at all. So I'm kind of wondering like what's the point in even worrying about the points in that case?
And I think that's where this game probably appeals to quite a wide demographic, where it is a game you could play with someone who's very young perhaps, because it isn't like Overcooked where you are under great amount of pressure to get like at the very minimum a 1 star, which in some cases can be really difficult. This game, it just says, here's the level, you can beat it in that time if you want, but if not, that's fine too. And you get minus 10 points every time you get hit by that swinging thing. And it's like,
sure,
it's very relaxed in that sense. So, and the game's only about maybe 4 hours long, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. And things ramp up where there's like one level where you're cutting down trees or using a saw that each of you are carrying together. And then there's like another level where you're using bombs to like bomb structures to release areas and get your guys down chutes and things, and like it does ramp up, and it's nice being in this one open world that they then just block off. Like that feels, this game could have easily just been sections of levels like an Overcooked, and there's something quite cool about the world building of having this open world that you drive around in a very cool like Animal Crossing Wild World style of rotating world, if that makes sense. Like it feels like you're on a big rolling pin kind of feeling.
In terms of, because I watched a bit of the quick look, and it seems almost a Simpsons hit and run level of space that you're exploring. So that's to say a more less open world, like a more
it's sort of open world circa 2001 era style, but it certainly looks a lot nicer than that.
Sure.
And you unlock 2 bridges that unlock the rest of the level later, and then the actual final boss is like there's upgrades you get to your ambulance, which is very cool, that I won't spoil. That make traversal different.
So is there like more gameplay associated with that traversal aside from just getting from one place to the other?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's about 3 levels. I reckon the whole game is maybe, I don't know, 20, 25 levels long, and there's 3 levels where it's specifically like driving skill and like using the ambulance to like get from A to B in a certain amount of time, which is fun. Like it's because one person's always driving and the other person has the ability to use the improvements to your ambulance, which I don't want to spoil because there's 2 different improvements and they both do different things, which is cool. So it's really fun. Like it's not the level of Overcooked for me, but it's certainly below that. And I'd also rate stuff like Lovers in a Dangerous Space Time a bit more fun personally. But
right, yeah, I was going to ask, like, how is the co-op? Do you have to do much communication, or is it pretty self-explanatory as you go through? Because you can actually play this game single player, and it's basically like Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, where you control each character with one stick each.
Yeah, you're doing so. It feels like you're doing enough where I wouldn't want to play it by myself with like 2 sticks. I think that would feel like overload. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like you're not doing much if you are playing co-op. Like you are still doing stuff and like picking up and putting down the stretcher and picking up people and stuff. And there are like switches and things to the levels. There's like banks and museums and these levels with like sliding doors and not shoots, what am I trying to say, like walkways that move, escalator things that are flat, moving walkways, there we go. Something like that you get like an airport that there's often a level designed where there's like a moving chute all the way through the level, and then you can just lob the bodies into that chute, and they'll find them all at the end. And so it is really fun, and there's so many moments me and Caroline were just laughing out loud with like the physics of just bodies flying all over the place.
Yeah, this seems like a kind of physical comedy type of thing that you would particularly enjoy.
Yeah, it's very funny at times, and often you're just like twisting people's limbs, or they drop, or so the environment blows them up and they fly across level, and it's very much my kind of comedy at times. It's very hilarious. And it's short, it doesn't overstay its welcome, it's fairly simple. I would say it doesn't mix up the formula a ton in the short space of time it's there, but you kind of know what you're getting in a way, so like I wouldn't call it out too much on that. And it's not like it's a 9-hour long game, like you can beat it very quickly. So I'd highly recommend it. It's not the best co-op experience I've ever had, but it's a very fun one. And ragdoll physics are, if you're into that sort of thing, like this game is very fun. I would say there was one level where we were completely stumped, and it turned out that one of the escalators that was meant to shoot our person up onto another level, just wasn't working. It wasn't. And
it glitched out?
It wasn't shooting us. It glitched or something, and we had to reset the level. So that was a bit annoying.
Yeah, the game doesn't seem overly polished. It doesn't seem to have that similar level of quality that Snipperclips had in terms of its just general attention to detail.
No, absolutely not. And I guess it is harder to polish something when it is so ragdoll in the way that this game is. Like it does.
Sure.
There's definitely some areas where you can definitely get your people stuck in places, or there's some corners, like there are these pigs in the game that will like hunt you down essentially. Like they ram into you and like if you're holding the stretcher, that will just knock it out of your hand. And there's points where you're kind of behind a building and you're trying to pick up a body using the stretcher, and there's a pig charging at you and you can't really see it, and it's like, oh, this is horrible. Like I need to get the pig to go over there to go back to the corner that I can't see the body, to pick up the body to get it to the ambulance, and so on. So
right, it's just streamlining in some senses.
There's some rough areas, but nothing. You could play the whole game and not notice any of them, to be honest. Like you have to be unlucky to find some of those, and it's a cool game. I highly recommend. I've also been playing a game that you have beaten, MBZ.
Yeah.
So I'll let you take the lead on this one.
No, you go for it, man. Give me your hot thoughts real quick. What is your take on Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, the second Respawn Entertainment game to be released this year? Hell of a year they've had, I'll tell you. It's a Star Wars game.
It's a very good Star Wars game. It's games like this that made me buy a PS4. It's the kind of stuff that you just don't see coming to Nintendo systems generally. And I'm only 4 or 5 hours in, and I'm really loving it. I'm obviously a huge Star Wars fan, and I think that's giving it a ton of credit from me personally. And I love the story. I love the characters. I love the world building, the world design. I think the fighting itself with the lightsaber feels fantastic, on the majority of enemies that I've faced. My gripes with the game so far are... It's a combination of the fact that there are some very glitchy aspects. Like I've had enemies in walls, enemies levitate towards me that definitely don't use the Force. And,
I mean, you could explain that away in a Star Wars context, really.
And it's just kind of like dying and then respawning enemies, being some issues. And then on top of that, one group of enemies in particular I was talking about with you on WhatsApp, I was finding very difficult, and the combination of them being quite glitchy and also quite hard. And I've never really played a Dark Souls style game, and I know there's huge aspects of this that are very Dark Soulsy. So that combination of the difficulty ramping up at points and a little bit glitchy has been a bit frustrating so far, but I know that will get easier as my character becomes more powerful. I get better at the fight system. I think this one type of enemy in particular has awkward timing, and I'm hoping that other enemies, the timing will be less awkward, but you could maybe say more on that. But so far, it's pretty great.
For me, the combat is at its strongest when you are in one-on-one encounters. A lot of the stuff you fight early on is like kind of bugs or like alien type things that they don't have the same obvious parry windows, right? So like you can parry enemies in this game, and stormtroopers will have swings that are a bit more obvious that you can knock away, whereas like the giant Ogdo Bogdo frog, sometimes I don't know whether I can parry him or not. And the game is actually kind of clear about what you can't parry, because they're flashing red, get out the way. So that's nice that they kind of include that as a bit of an accessibility feature. I wonder how that holds up for someone like Jeff Gersman in Colorblind, if there is Colorblind mode at all.
Sure.
Because that seems
it's like those stormtroopers, the second you get the counter in and they've lost their balance, and you can kill them instantly. Whereas these other enemies that I don't want to spoil, they... like as they're attacking you, you can counter them, but you have to counter them 3 or 4 times before they're completely staggered to where you can do lots of damage. And even on top of that, they take so much health.
Even some of the stormtroopers who have like a orange pauldron, they take multiple hits for you to break their guard, essentially, right? This is why a lot of people are comparing this game specifically to Sekiro, which came out earlier this year, because that game was very much about breaking an enemy's guard with a parry. Then you can actually attack the health bar. And that's the case here, which is every enemy has kind of a block bar almost, where you have to knock that out first, then they're susceptible to actually doing damage to them.
Yeah, I feel like it would be more believable if, rather than having to break their parry 3 times and then do like a third of health and then do that process 3 times, it'd feel better. So essentially breaking their parry 9 times almost to beat one enemy at times, it feels like. Rather that, it would be better if the second their guard is broken and you've got a damn lightsaber, you're slicing through them, they're dead, and that's not to say the game should be easier, but once you've broken their balance and you've got a lightsaber, you should be killing almost anyone.
Yeah, exactly. So like when you get to harder enemies and it's like, okay, I have to break them multiple times and then I'm slicing them, it's like, I think a lot of people are, understandably, lightsabers in Star Wars, you slice through a thing, it basically cuts it. It cuts anything. Like it's this almost ultra weapon that you can't stop it with raw material, right? It just will go through whatever. And obviously there's examples in the films where you can't instantly do that. Like I think of Qui-Gon trying to get in the Trade Federation room in episode 1, and he's like slowly holding the lightsaber to make a hole.
I mean, it's working, like
it takes time, but it will eventually get through. yeah, this game doesn't do that, and it deliberately can't do that because you can't have a satisfying combat system if you just slice everything down in one hit. It just wouldn't work. It wouldn't build up that type of momentum. How have you felt about the force powers in this game? Because for me, this is one of the weakest aspects in terms of you have a force meter, and so when you do certain moves, it takes up that force meter. And then similar to Hollow Knight, where you're like building up your meter for health and stuff when you hit enemies. When you hit enemies with regular attacks, you build up your force meter again. What's your experience been so far? Because I think you have force push so far.
Yeah, I've got force push and then like the force slowdown thing that you start the game with, and I like it a lot. Like I like the bar in the sense that it is easy to build up, but at the same time it's not overpowered. It's a good balance of you can use the force when your back's up against the wall, but you might open a battle with the force, but you're not just using the force. It forces you. That's the wrong word to use, but it makes you use your lightsaber to fight. And I like that. For me personally, it's a neat balance of the two where, oh, I am about to die, but my force meter is full. Okay, well, I'll force push. Oh, I just shoved a bunch of guys off that cliff. I guess I'm okay now, sort of thing. Like, and I love that balance.
I tell you, there's no better feeling than when there's a really hard enemy and you're like getting up behind them and you force push and they just fall down the hole. And you're like, oh, don't need to fight him. He's gone. Like, he would have taken me.
It's a good feeling, but I do feel like I need to practice more, like the
sure,
counters. So I kind of like,
and the game gives you a lot of opportunities to do that, right? You think
That's
about
true.
the meditation system. You know, this is pulled straight out of Souls, where you go to, like in those games, you go to a bonfire, and in these games, there's a meditation circle, like a Jedi kind of center for where you just sit down and like think on your thoughts and heal yourself, I guess, somehow through that process. But it refills your stim, and so your stims come from BD1, who's the robot buddy droid, who's really cool. I like BD1 a lot.
Very cute.
He is kind of the Metroid aspect of this game in all senses, because he'll like beam out the Metroid Prime-esque map. He will scan things.
And I love that he beams it out himself. It's so cool.
I love that context within the world. It's like not just a map on a menu, but it literally shows you. You can get a bit. You need to be careful because enemies can still hit you with that map up. Like, it doesn't pause the game.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, so don't do that where there's enemies attacking you, because it won't pause the action. What do you think of him? Because you love Metroid Prime, right? Like, that is your jam, and you love the map of Metroid Prime and the scanning of that game as well. That's what BD1 is, essentially.
These maps are even better than Metroid Prime. Like, they're obviously the same, like, blue three-dimensional design, but on top of that, it just seems a lot more smooth, but also it's marked really well.
I think you can see the structure, the geometry much more clearly. You can recognize what area is what from that. Whereas I felt with Prime a lot of the time, it's far more polygonal in nature, and you don't get a lot of the details of what actually is in the room.
It's a lot more polygonal, yeah. But also just having, here's an orange area that you've not been to yet on this side of the room. I like stuff like that. I know a lot of probably Metroid purists will be like, that's outrageous. How on earth could they have a map that tells you where to go, essentially?
Or like shows what's accessible and what's inaccessible.
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of works with this game.
I love that, man. Like, that's one of my most frustrating things about Metroid Fusion, which is one of my favorite games. But like, when things happen in that map and it changes stuff, like, there's a door in Sector 2 that breaks early on in the game, and when you're doing cleanup there and like trying to get all the abilities, the map doesn't change to reflect that, so it doesn't show you that you can't actually make it through this area, even though it's blocked off. Like, it just doesn't update, essentially. Whereas I love this game is so forward with its information, being like, okay, here are a bunch of green doors. You can now access these. Here's a red door. You can't go through there yet. It just helps in terms of, there's a lot of backtracking in this game. You go back to planets multiple times. So it just makes your life easier, right? It's going to be more accessible generally.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, what's the stuff I've not seen? Are you happy with it?
Yes. So my experience with this game, first 4 hours, I got it a little early because I basically, I played this game on PC through Origin Access Premier, which is a program that EA has on PC that you can pay them $15 a month, or pounds a month, I should say, which is damn sight more expensive than Game Pass and nowhere near as good as Game Pass. to get access to their games day one, and they have a whole back catalogue of like 200 games or whatever. I had to scroll through. There's not really anything in there I want to play that badly that I don't already own in some other fashion. But it was a great way to just play this new game that I otherwise would have had to go out and spend 40-50 quid on day one. And I've beaten the game already. Like I only need a month, so I've already cancelled my first month. So I've paid 15 quid essentially to play this new game, which is great. It's awesome. What it meant was that because on digital storefronts the game unlocked early for different regions. So in New Zealand it was unlocked basically Thursday our time. So I downloaded like a VPN and like spoofed my PC to think the region was New Zealand. So I preloaded the game and then got in early. So I started playing it on that Thursday before the game even came out on Friday. And I, for the first 4 hours, was very frustrated with a lot of aspects, mainly technical stuff. And I never actually experienced too much of what you were talking about with like glitches and like people floating. For me, it was more the inconsistency of the frame rate. Now, I will be honest, I have a GTX 970, which is... It's a good graphics card still, but it's getting old. I've had it for 4 years now, so in PC terms, that's like 7 decades. And so it's struggled to keep up. Like I think the 970 is kind of on a par with the PS4 Pro, which means that I was having similar problems to people playing on the performance mode on console, which, you know, the frame rate is inconsistent. It's constantly fluctuating. There's some stutters going on. So I was really bummed out because I couldn't get a consistent experience. And I don't think the start of the game is that good in terms of its storytelling, right? It sets some stuff up, but you get such little time with the characters you're introduced to. So you like get off your starting planet and you meet up with Seer and with Grease, who are the two people on your ship. And like there's a little bit of setup for like what's happened in the world, like where we are and things like that. But it didn't give me much. Like the first 4 hours, like the first planet, and like I went through Zepho, did all the Zepho stuff, and then kind of stopped after the end of Zepho, and I wasn't all that impressed. I think I was also fighting the controls, getting used to the combat, understanding the parry system. I didn't like how parry was like on this one shoulder button, and then dodge was on B, but jump was on A, and then you fought with X. For me, I like to have dodge and attack next to each other, but because this game also does platforming stuff, like it does the Uncharted running on walls and like jumping and climbing.
But because you're dodging and attacking, or essentially parrying and then attacking at such short spaces of time, I kind of can appreciate why one's shoulder button and one's not. And that's like God of War, you know, like the parry.
Yeah, I get that. I think my complaint was more with the dodge being like directly across from the attack, right? So like I can't like roll my finger to dodge like I usually would do. So I ended up jumping a lot in those early hours and just getting fucked over.
You're right. Yeah, dodge is a big deliberate right move over to circle when squares attack. Sure.
Totally. So that was my issue going into it. It took me so long to just get my head around the combat, and ultimately, as I said before, this game is at its strongest when it's one-on-one. When you're in groups of enemies, it feels like you don't really have the power or the tools to get around that.
That's where the force powers, I feel, are incredibly important to break up groups of units to take one at a time, essentially. And that's something I need to get better at as I move on in the game. It's
something that I recommended to you was like, if I'm honest, unless you fully upgrade some of these powers to like force push, it's not going to be that effective against enemies. Like the base level stormtrooper guys, like Dumbos, you can throw those off cliffs. But the harder enemies, they'll just get...
So you like duck them, yeah.
Yeah, they get like just a little bit staggered and it barely does anything. And in that case, something like Time Stop is more important because it gives you the opportunity to actually get around them from a different side. And when you hit them there, they can't block it, which means you actually take health off their main bar as opposed to just their block one. So that was helpful because either you would use it on an enemy and then you'd be able to hit them, or you'd use it on an enemy if there were two attacking you and you could slow one down and focus on the one that was active, right? So you could kind of deal with them one at a time in some sense. But I just don't think that, like, and I get the journey, right? Because you are building your skills as you go, and Cal is, like, remembering these things, because he is a Jedi, like, he was a Padawan, and he's building, like, he's kind of, you're getting your force powers by remembering them from the past, almost.
It's cool flashbacks to, like, your master, and you
definitely
essentially learn a skill as young Cal.
And I love his, like, Jara Tapal, I love his design, like, as a Jedi. I think he's a really interesting...
Master.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a really interesting character from like a looks perspective.
Do you know what race he is? I don't know the
I have
name.
no idea
Anyway.
what race he is. He seems like something completely new. But yeah, I like those scenes, and there's more of that stuff, and there's some really great things they do with this story going forward. Like, as soon as I got to Kashyyyk, I did Kashyyyk, and that's like that area. There's some variety in the gameplay. They do some interesting things, and I was really on board with the game after that. Like post Kashyyyk, I was like, okay, I feel like I'm in the groove. I'm getting it. I also got a better setting set up on my PC, so I had like dynamic resolution going, which meant that the frame rate would stay closer to 60 majority of the time, but I also got a little bit more used to it, so it wasn't front of my mind constantly and wasn't taking me out of the experience. And from that point forward, I was just like barreling on through. I was like, okay, yeah, oh, we're learning this. Oh, and then this thing happens. And okay, we're going to go to this place. There are sections that you'll go back to, and some of them feel a little bit too long, but there are some great set piece moments and really good story reveals and just good character work, I think. Like this really is a story, a contained story about these specific characters and their experiences within this wider universe. And I think that's something that The Mandalorian is excelling at right now. Like, it is a contained narrative with, it has hints at what could be, stuff for the wider world of the universe. But I think it stands strong because it's being more contained. So both these things coming out around the same time, 2 different time periods. Interestingly, both of them around the same distance from the movie. So like this is 5 years post Revenge of the Sith, and Mandalorian is 5 years post Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
So it's curious that like both these things are happening at the same time, and there are similarities in each of them. But ultimately, like this game does so much with Star Wars, and so for me, it is this mismatch of lots of different games from lots of different genres. It's the master of none of those things, but it does everything serviceably or well enough to where you enjoy it, right? It's no Uncharted in terms of its set pieces. It's no Metroid in terms of its world design, but it does have those moments of like, oh, shortcut unlocked, or like now I can more easily get to this part of the map, where you feel satisfied. Like I talk about with Skyward Sword, like rolling the log down and getting that
shortcut,
ease of access. Yeah.
And the Star Wars lick of paint generally is pretty good for me, at least. So
yeah,
far.
the music is fantastic.
Yeah.
It opens with a soundtrack choice that is not what you expect from Star Wars, but like it kind of works. Like it's really interesting how it kind of weaves its way through that stuff. And of course, all the sound effect stuff. The lightsaber looks incredible, and obviously, like customizing your lightsaber is a big deal in this game. One of the things I'll say is I'm not that compelled to go back to this game and search for secrets, because I don't think the secrets are that interesting. Like you get different ponchos, you get different skins for BD1, and there'll be some people who that appeals to a bit more. For me, I went out of my way to find them if I was exploring an area, but it's not the type of thing I'm compelled to go back to find. Because I just don't think the reward is that interesting. Have you done much exploring and trying to find side stuff, or do like there's some puzzles that will hide extra stim packs or things like that, which are worth going for. But
yeah, I've not always mainlined it. I've kind of gone off the beaten path where it's looked interesting or it's been accidental, because often like when you are exploring, especially like when I was on Zepho, it was just very much like, I guess I could go this way or this way. I'll try it this way and see what happens, and just kept going. And then I realized I was like almost had to go through like a series of mini bosses essentially, that I thought at that point I was like, this definitely isn't where I'm meant to be, but I'm going to do this. And I kept dying, but I kept going back to it, and I eventually did it. And then I got like some sort of paint job or something, and it was like, okay, well, that was interesting. And like,
sure,
I might do that again if I do it accidentally, but I'm not going to push hard to see every secret. And likewise, I'm not going to just stick to the main line totally. I'll go off the beaten path a little bit, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think this game is solid. It's really good, and I think if you're not a Star Wars fan, you'll enjoy it. Like, it's a good game, and you'll have a good time with it. If you're a Star Wars fan, this game hits on so many levels. And that is the thing. Like, I've heard this from a lot of people. Like, I think Ash Paulson on Kind of Funny was talking about how he was 5 hours into the game, and like Tim and Greg were like going crazy about how amazing the story is and all this stuff. And I was very much with Ash. Like, I was 4 hours into the game. I was like, I don't know, I'm not really feeling this right now. but it really does start to build, and it starts to pay off later on as you get deeper into it. And there's some really interesting, like there's stuff from the Clone Wars that comes up in this game, which I'm not super familiar with, but I know a little bit about. Like one planet in particular that you get kind of surprised by, like, oh wow, like this has a connection. And ultimately for me, the strongest part of this game is lightsaber duels. Like, they have fucking nailed a boss fight, one-on-one, lightsaber to lightsaber. I found the parrying so satisfying in those fights, and just all the moves you have to dodge out. It was really well considered.
There's a lot of GIFs going around of like those fights in slow motion and stuff, and the animation is through the roof, or like on that mastery.
Yeah, totally. And for me, it was far more just using my lightsaber. I wasn't using force powers that much, and as I said, I'm not a huge fan of them because it feels like it's too expensive to use force powers. Like, one of the moves you get is an overheaded slice with the Y button, which is like a heavy attack. And I think the animation priority of taking so long to do the heavy attack is punishment enough, but the fact that you lose force meter and then it doesn't hit as well kind of sucks even more. So I wish that type of attack wasn't like tied to your force meter. I wish it had been more tied to just the push and pull and the time stop and things like that. But that said, God, those are some of my favorite third-person combat sequences in any game I've ever played, is the lightsaber duels. And there's like a good 4 or 5 of them. All of them are excellent. They are so much fun. I had a great time with those. So
cool.
So yeah,
I look forward to those. Are there many of them? Or is that a spoiler?
Yeah, I literally just said there's like 4 or 5.
4 or 5. Sorry, right.
Across the game. Yeah. I'm very excited for you to get to some of this later game stuff. As I said, I want to talk to somebody about this game. I need to do that. So there's some things which I'm excited about. So there we go. I mean, you know, this is the end of the year, Bally. All the big releases have happened, so we spent a lot of time talking about these games. But I think it was well worth doing so. But we're going to take a break, and we'll come back after this with some emails. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the show. It is the second segment, and that means it's time for your listener emails. We're into the end of November now, and that means that we have Game of the Year episodes coming up in December, and that also means we want to hear about your games of the year. So we want to hear about all the games you've played this year that didn't come out this year, as well as the ones that did. We want Nintendo games, we want non-Nintendo games, we want your lists. Send them to us to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. You can also post your lists in our Discord server, link to that in the description, or on our Twitter account @TNL Podcast. So make sure to check that out, and yeah, we would love to read all of your lists. Our first email this week is from B King, who's from Sweden. Hey guys, me and a friend of mine are huge Pokemon fans and are very much looking forward to the new upcoming game on Switch. So this is a bit
slightly old email.
Slightly old. However, we felt like Nintendo and the Pokemon Company showed off way too much of the games when trying to maintain the hype cycle ahead of Sun and Moon, to the point where we felt it had ruined a big part of the experience for us. We therefore decided that we, from now on, will try and avoid all the information on Sword and Shield by going media silent. Have you ever felt like trailers for a game you have been excited for have shown too much of the game to the point where you think it actively made you enjoy the game less? Also, have you ever tried to go media silent for a game generally? Greetings from Sweden, Beaking. P.S. My girlfriend recently went to Edinburgh and said she really enjoyed it.
Everyone loves Edinburgh.
Everyone
I don't
loves
think
Edinburgh.
I've ever heard anyone go to Edinburgh and say to me, that was a bad place to go.
Yes, why did you recommend that place? It's awful. It's like,
No.
I've never heard that. It's just,
No.
It doesn't happen.
It's impossible. It's too good of a place. Great. Bally, is there anything that comes to mind to you? And the thing with this actually is impressive because contrasted to Sun and Moon, which Pokemon did do a lot of stuff ahead of launch and showed all this thing. And I even mentioned it in the previous section where I was like, going into this, they were pretty reticent to show anything. They were like, okay, we'll just hold things back. And it has meant that I think a lot of people, myself included, have gone into these new games pretty much media silent and have discovered a lot of things for themselves and not had to have them kind of spoiled. And it gives that greater sense of exploration and excitement when you're playing the game.
Yeah, I find that for a select few games that I am totally excited about, like for example next year, I think at the moment it's probably like Animal Crossing, maybe Last of Us 2, although I still need to play the first game. Like there's a handful of games coming, the absolute top tier games I'm most excited for, that I'll watch the trailers, but I won't look up information or look up extended gameplay perhaps, and that can be quite difficult when you might be watching some E3 show where they just shoehorn extended gameplay into that show or something, and I'll be a bit like, oh well, that is interesting, and it worked well with something like Breath of the Wild, but certainly I don't want to see a ton of stuff on Animal Crossing, although I'll probably just intrinsically absorb it through social media and other podcasts, to be honest. And
although to be fair, like you do kind of have a sieve of a memory, as we've mentioned before.
I do have a sieve of a memory, yeah.
And so like you going into a game like God of War practically blind, despite the fact that you definitely saw those trailers, you just weren't like paying attention that much.
The difference with that game was, and this is why I think my brain was especially a sieve with that kind of stuff, is that stuff I have no interest in, my memory for is awful. And like, so at the time I didn't have a realistic interest in the sense that I didn't own a PS4 and I didn't plan on getting one in the near future, to the point where I wasn't concentrating on those trailers or any info on it when it was all floating around at E3. I kind of just let it go, and then when I eventually did get the game, it was very fresh. So that was almost kind of accidental in a way, where I do think that I don't find trailers for video games, at least more often than not, don't tend to ruin too much for me. It's that sort of mechanics and extended gameplay.
Right. That's the difference between movies and games, is that a movie is a 2-hour thing. Yeah. And like a lot of trailers are very spoilery for movies. I think Disney has started to get around this with like Rogue One. The trailer had a bunch of stuff that wasn't in the movie, and also with Avengers stuff they tend to do not fake trailers, but like trailers with stuff that won't actually be in the movie, so it doesn't spoil the experience.
Yeah, and I like that because it does make the trailer stand alone, right, and doesn't spoil anything as much.
But that's nice. The problem is like there's so much less there with a movie in terms of pure amount of time you will spend with it and things you will see. Whereas with a game, a 2-minute trailer can't really encapsulate like 90 hours of Persona 5, right? No. It gives you a flavor, but there's so much in there that is hidden that even if you didn't go media blackout on P5 and like you were watching everything they put out, you could probably play that game and still be pretty shocked by lots of things that happen and see places you've never seen before and lots of stuff. And that's one of the benefits to games, is that they can have, like, they can last for however long and they can have so much stuff in them that marketing wise they're allowed a bit more leeway in that sense.
And it is one of those frustrating things where video games are becoming much more like films in the sense of the way that they're marketed. So trailers, where I would argue like a trailer for a video game can show off much more about the visuals, the characters, and the story, whereas it's not great at showing mechanics in the same way. You really have to kind of feel those for yourself often. So we're now in this situation where video game trailers are almost like movie trailers, where you don't see any gameplay and you're just seeing like a bit of story, a bit of plot, and some of the visuals. And especially for a game like Avengers, which is coming out next year, where we have now eventually through like leaked sources and stuff seen a lot more gameplay for that game. At the time at E3 when that game was first shown off, it was really kind of jaw-dropping how little we actually saw of how that game would work, and that's something that that you want to know and find out. And at the same time as I wouldn't want to be spoiled on extended gameplay, I want to see a bit of gameplay to work out how the game works.
Totally, yeah, and that's the balance that you have to strike, right? I think it was the issue with Fallen Order for a while, where the first trailer for that I was like, okay, like I don't know what this game is yet, but they showed me some CG, showed me some cutscenes, and like, here's our main character. It's like, okay, I don't care. Like, that's the problem with that for me personally, is it doesn't engage me until I've seen what is the thing I'm going to be buying, right? I'm not buying a movie. I'm not buying cutscenes. I'm buying an experience to play. So that's definitely an interesting case. And I think it's an interesting case because at XO 19, the Xbox event that they had in London, where they announced a bunch of things for Game Pass, did some new game announcements from Rare and stuff like that, like Everwild. They showed a gameplay trailer for Fallen Order, and it spoiled a thing that I didn't really want to see. It's a thing it's the thing I told you to go to get on Dathomir.
All right. Yeah.
And so I knew about that thing before I played that game. And I will say that made me enjoy the game less, in some sense. Like, that being spoiled, it was like, I would have loved to come to that on my own, naturally, and be surprised by it in the moment. But when I saw it, I was like, oh, cool, I got the thing. I knew I was going to get the thing, and I got the thing. And so moments like that will happen. And I think that's why, when I'm getting to the later parts of Fallen Order and I'm seeing all this new stuff, it is hitting me so much more because it's unexpected, because I'm not waiting for it to happen, because it wasn't marketed, it wasn't part of what they were showing. So for me, that can affect a game's enjoyment. Like, it's not on a big level, but like all these micro decisions that get made in the marketing in terms of what they show you beforehand, every single one of those is going to take away a piece of surprise that you could have had otherwise.
Yeah. And for every game that might have some minor thing spoiled in a trailer or gameplay that I've then gone on to enjoy that game ever so slightly less because of that, there's a whole tranche of games that I wouldn't play at all if it wasn't for the trailers and how that game looked or played. The trailers still do their job in terms of getting me interested in a game if it's something I have no interest in before. And like, there are arguably only a select few games and franchises that I know day one I'm going to pick up that game no matter what, and if I was to do a media blackout, it would obviously be for those games. Whereas most games that I played this year, I probably didn't plan on playing last year, and it is through reviews and trailers and watching gameplay that I have become interested to buy and play those games.
Totally, yeah. And it's for indie games, it's different, right? So you see something like Ape Out, and you're like, all right, I know what this game is, but I still want to play it. So and you can watch gameplay of that and pretty much get everything. Like, obviously they have some little twists here and there, and like each level will look different, but ultimately you know what that game is. But also the experience of that game is not about spoilers. Like, you can't spoil someone on Ape Out. It's not that type of experience. Yeah. So it does depend on the game. That said, Katana Zero is a game with a lot of surprises in it, a lot of things that I didn't expect to happen, and did enhance my enjoyment. The fact that I went into this game thinking it's one thing, but then it ends up doing a bunch of things that I didn't expect whatsoever. So some of that stuff just happens as a byproduct of like, what type of game is it? Because Katana Zero is a game, I mean, I'm one of those people who's weird, and I've been following it since it was shown off on a GDC live stream at Kind of Funny years ago. But most people won't, and most people will go into that game and be like, oh, I heard people talking about this seems cool, and play it, and not have to worry about going media blackout, right? The media blackout thing is very much for huge franchises or big games that are all about marketing pushes and throwing trailers out there, like the AAA stuff, basically. And I mean, it's not a game, but neither of us are watching anything else that's happening for Rise of Skywalker. We're done with that stuff, right? Like, we're so close to that movie. They're putting up all these TV spots and stuff on YouTube. I'm not clicking on any of these fucking things because I've seen enough of what the trailers have shown me. It's a Star Wars movie. Of course I'm going to watch it. And I think, like, I remember that first experience of sitting in the cinema with you watching Force Awakens, and it was fucking magic because there were so many surprises and things that we didn't expect. And my experience with that movie and my memories and my fondness for it is enhanced because I went in with, like, zero knowledge, essentially.
I want to say we actually jointly managed to avoid the final trailer with that film. Do you remember this?
Probably.
Yeah,
I don't remember what it was, but I think...
Which we have failed to do with this film.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, that last trailer they did wasn't overly... It didn't seem overly spoiler anyway.
Yeah, it's also different. Like, Force Awakens was the start of a trilogy.
Sure.
This is the third film in a trilogy. So,
and we also have to question how much of this stuff is going to be in the film, right?
Sure.
Are Disney doing another one of those things where they're putting a bunch of scenes in which actually won't be in the final movie? I don't know. They could very well be doing that, which would be cool, because then we go in and we're like, oh, that thing didn't happen. They didn't do that thing from the trailer, and adds to the surprise, adds to the enjoyment. But are there any games you can think of where you have committed? Because, like, for me, the thing that I realize with Easy Allies is a lot of those guys will be like, complete media blackout, don't want to see anything. Like Michael Huber, even when they're doing some reaction to some stuff, sometimes he'll just, like, close his eyes, like, block his ears out and just look away from the screen, which is, like, kind of antithetical to the idea that they do a lot of reactions to things, so you kind of want to see reactions. But I feel that I only do this in certain situations because, as we were saying at the start, for the most part, games are pretty good about giving you enough while also having so much more that you don't need to be too worried about being spoiled.
Yeah, it's hard work doing media blackout, to be honest, especially if you're online the amount we are.
Especially, if you're on Twitter, then you're going to get something is going to happen, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and the fucking, we should have probably talked about this in our social media episode. To plug for our Patreon, we did a Patreon episode on social media, go check it out. The changes that have happened to Twitter where they show things that people you follow have liked or people have liked, the timeline on Twitter is so fucked up now. It's not what it should be. Like, Twitter used to be, here is a sequential order of the people you follow, and now it just shoves a bunch of bullshit in there, like people I don't want to see on my timeline, like loads of people that just suddenly appear, and I'm like, who are you? Like, I don't want to. Yeah, God, terrible stuff going on with that.
Really
That's,
bad,
like,
really bad.
Negative, but
I mean,
but you will get spoiled because of that, much more likely this time. And I think many of the things Pokemon-wise I've been spoiled on are shit that people have liked a tweet of, and it's popped up on my feed. And I'm like, I don't want to see that, man. Like, God, it's really annoying.
If I was going to do media blackout, because it would have to be so total, it would ultimately be for a number of things all in one. It wouldn't be for one thing. And I listen to too many podcasts and media blackout. Like, come on, like people talk about stuff, and I think people have become really good at talking about things in spoiler-free terms, and spoiler warnings, sticking stuff at the end of shows, spoiler-exclusive podcasts, that kind of thing for the really important stuff. But in terms of, like, seeing worlds revealed or seeing power-ups in something like Mario Odyssey, you know, all the transformations. Yeah,
Mario Odyssey is like the prime candidate of, like, they showed too many places in that game. They just did. They should have held back somewhat.
Yeah, they went overboard on the places. I think they did well in terms of showing the
captures.
Captures, that's what they're called. Yeah, they didn't reveal too many of those. I think the T-Rex one was maybe over the top, but at the same time, it's so over the top that they wanted to show everyone, you know, like, it was like, what?
Yeah, it was a great trailer moment. Like, that was the thing that made that game pop at E3, was that trailer where they were like, and this and this and this and this, and it was just like loads and loads of things that they were showing on screen.
Yeah, it was overload, which was cool. So yeah, no, I've not really been overly spoiled on anything trailer related or podcasts, and I think we've both learned who to listen to, who to avoid, you know, and I don't think we get spoiled generally too much on games.
So let's take something like Breath of the Wild 2. Would you be able, do you think, to go media silent for Breath of the Wild 2? Avoid completely trailers and gameplay and all that stuff? Probably not, right? I mean, for one thing...
No, because I'm going to watch Nintendo Directs, and the second they're like, Breath of the Wild 2, it's like, well, this is a moment I've been waiting for. Like, I want to see this.
And the other thing is, like, as podcasters, we have a duty to... We do an E3 show every year, so we watch E3. So I'm not just going to shut my eyes during the Breath of the Wild 2 segment and then...
No E3 show this year. We're both doing a media blackout. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, exactly,
right,
yeah. Like, what? It's been ridiculous. So for me, that is... And I do put faith in companies that when they do know, they have those big events, those tentpole moments where they know everyone is watching, that's when they'll usually put a trailer out that isn't going to be overly spoilery or ruin the experience for anyone. But it's going to entice people to get more interested in the game from like a wider perspective. It's when Nintendo just puts out, like, this is the good example that the B King's writing in with, is like, the Pokemon channel was just like every day. It's like, here's a new Pokemon, here's a move, here's a thing. And there are examples of this type of marketing within Nintendo that actually I love, which is Super Smash Brothers, right? Like, the dojo was Sakurai every day being like, here's the thing, and here's the thing, and here's another thing. And so by the time the game comes out, you practically know everything that was in Brawl, but you still want to play it because, like, that's the experience of Smash Brothers. It's not necessarily the excitement of revealing things. Yeah, and I feel very differently about Smash Brothers in the sense of some people were like, oh, I want to go into the Wii U game not knowing who the unlockable characters are. But to me, that's not really part of the experience because, like, it's Smash Brothers. The internet is gonna talk about these characters. These characters are marketing beats.
Yeah, those spoilers are just too big to avoid. Like,
totally,
because you can be spoiled entirely by a simple headline. That's the problem.
Right.
Regardless of images or videos, just a headline is going to ruin that in a single tweet. So,
and ultimately, it's about the type of game it is, which is like, what Smash Brothers is. You know. Like, these characters are going to be in there. It's more about playing the game and actually learning the moves and, like, seeing who your favorite is and stuff like that. Whereas, again, this I think this type of argument with media silence has come more into fashion because the industry progressively moves towards narrative in terms of presenting their games. And so if you ruin a story, like, that's the thing. That's the reason you're there in a lot of ways. So yeah, but again, like, single player stuff, even Pokemon, just seeing places, seeing towns, seeing new Pokemon you can consider spoilers and takes away from the experience. So.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, B King, thanks for the email. It's a good question. Our next email is from Ryan, who's from the internet. Hey, MBZ and Bally. I always enjoy listening to your top games lists shows because it's hilarious to hear you both bicker like an old married couple about which games are better than others. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's all in good fun because you know opinions and such. That being said, Bally, one absolute game fact is that you need to play Chrono Trigger so you understand why it should be above so many of the games you tried to put higher. My question arises from doing the list. Are there any games that you've played, or I guess haven't but know enough about, where you vehemently disagree with a specific or general opinion about the game? For example, MBZ completely disagreeing with Bally over Octopath Traveler. Any highly regarded games you think are absolute crap, or vice versa. And then this email is from when we were talking about going to the States. So he said, P.S. Being a Chicagoan, Portillo's hot dogs are great, but where it's really at are the chocolate cake shakes. A delicious slice of fattening chocolate cake blended into the shake is drool-inducing and artery-clogging in one go.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, we didn't try that and missed out on Portillo's, but
next
time.
Speaking of Greg Miller, like, he is like the champion of Portillo's, so that is a thing. I doubt he brought any with him to give to people or anything. But, that'd be nice. One day I'll get over there and enjoy one. But Bally, I hate Octopath Traveler. It's the worst game I've made. Well, no, this is the thing. It's like, I put Octopath Traveler as my number 9 game last year, like, in my top 10.
Yeah, I think everyone now thinks you hate that game when actually, as you say, it is number 9 on your top games.
Yeah, no, I like it. I do like Octopath Traveler. I think that my problem was you put it way too high. Like, I don't think it deserved to be that high on a list of games, but that's I think fair. When we do those lists, we do heighten our opinions to some degree because we're trying to get our favourites up the top and not the other person. So it's back and forth, and it's like bartering and things like that. So, that said, I definitely disagree with a lot of people on that game in certain aspects. So, are there any particular examples that stand out to you, Bally, of like opinions that people have on a game that you just don't feel?
Inside just didn't jive with me in the way it did with a lot of people, and it, like Metacritic, OpenCritic really rate that game generally, and I just needed one more fulfilling, and we've talked about it before, but I needed one more fulfilling step with what that game was trying to tell you went, and it didn't feel complete in my mind, and because it has a lot of build up for me. Yeah. And that build-up didn't have the payoff I had wanted or expected. And that kind of set me apart. Maybe just me and Greg Miller. Aside from everyone else. It's not in my top echelon of games for sure.
Sure. I mean, you're wrong, but fine. You're entitled to think what you like about it. Other
than Inside, I think Undertale as well is a game that a lot of people really love, and there are moments of that game I do like a lot, but I think the comparisons to Earthbound are fair, but for me Earthbound is just above and beyond so much more than that game in like its story and world building. And Undertale, there's just too much about it that like the whole multiple timelines and plots and good and evil.
I think people are probably shouting at their devices right now because they're like, "Bally, you fucking idiot! You have to play it on the thingy, not patricide, genocide, not genocide. What's the one where you don't kill anyone? Pacifist, pacifist. Yeah. You have to play the pacifist route, and you have to go and do the side quest with Undyne, and you have to go see this person,
exactly.
And there's all these characters.
If you have to do all that to get the game in its best light, then maybe the game isn't as great as it's hyped up to be, I would argue.
No, I see what you mean, but I think a lot of Undertale fans get very belligerent because they're like,
and they're allowed to.
Look, man, they're like fucking crazy. They're like, fuck it, you didn't see this whole game. You got to see the whole game in order to appreciate it. And for the regular player, like, you'll play 7 hours of Undertale and finish the game. And it depends on how much you invest in it to whether you feel like it's worthwhile to go and do that stuff. And I didn't play that stuff, but I went and watched it. And I have an understanding now of why people think that way, and I totally get that. I just didn't want to go through it myself. I don't want to play the whole game again in order to, just unlock certain story things which are more revealing about.
Yeah, I mean, as short as that game is for an RPG, it's still a long game. Like it's a good 8 hours, right?
Yeah,
7 hours. It's a medium to small length game, I would argue. It's true,
sure.
But it's not short. I'd argue like 3 hours and under short. Anyway, the good old one we love to rag against, I love to rag against on this show, Super Mario World. People just need to chill out about that game a bit more. It's a good game. I enjoyed it. It's good. It's a good platformer. It's probably a very important platformer in the future of 2D platformers, but it doesn't hold up in comparison to loads of 2D platformers. And I think the fact that Super Mario World feels so different inside of Mario Maker compared to the original shows how much even Nintendo appreciate the world has moved on a bit, and that the physics in that game worked for the time, but everything's improved, responsiveness has improved now, and it's not a classic that holds up in the same way, I would argue.
I disagree with you. I actually think Super Mario World does hold up a lot. But I think my perspective is coloured by the fact that I think Super Mario Bros. 3 is fucking straight garbage, Like, that's my...
So I still need to play that
opinion.
game, and I'd be interested. And, like, I do think Mario World holds up, but I don't think it holds up as a true great, I should make clear. Like, it holds up as a good game. It's a good game.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely.
But I don't think it holds up as a great game.
Whereas I think Super Mario Bros. 3 is, like, an okay game. Like, it's fine, but it just blows my mind how much people hold that game up as this bastion of game design, where I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, it's frustrating in so many ways. Like, it is an incredibly frustrating game. So much bullshit, right? Like, the amount of times that I found a level where I thought, this was made so that you had to die and go back to a save point and play the game up to this point again because, classic arcade style design, and they were getting past that at that point on the NES, but it was a late NES release, and it still existed there. So, yeah, I mean, people know. I think, like, answering this question, I think it's implied that if you listen to this podcast, you know that our opinion on Mario World and Mario 3 are very different from most people on Nintendo podcasts.
Exactly.
And I would say, like, our age has something to do with that, but also,
But also, we're big 2D platformer fans.
Right,
and, I've played a ton of 2D platformers. I think a lot of people who love Super Mario World, it's going to sound snobby, I just don't think they've played enough 2D platformers.
No, I don't think that's right. I think it is a taste thing, right? I think if you grow up with the style of platformer that Mario is, then you won't like certain way other things control.
Yeah.
So Dan Reichert, for example, loves Mario World, like one of his favorite games of all time. He didn't like Ori and the Blind Forest, and he didn't like Celeste, two of the games which I think control sublimely and are some of the best platformers ever made, so it's the perspective you come from and what you latch onto in terms of just control and design.
And then finally a game which I know you have much stronger feelings about, but I still don't like as much as the critical media rate this game, and it was still my number 5 game from last year. I believe it might have been 4. No, it wasn't as 4. Maybe it was 6. I can't even remember now.
It was number 5. I'm pretty
number
sure.
5, Red Dead 2, and like as an example of a game where it's visually better than how it feels, and that's definitely what Rockstar went for in terms of like. Mm-hmm. That whole thing, I think people need to step back and make sure that before you give a game, that absolute top echelon of ranking, rating, whatever you do on your own website or whatever, that it fundamentally feels good. And that game, for the most part, doesn't feel that great. It's got a fantastic story. The characters grew on me tremendously. I did get used to the clunky controls eventually, but they were still not good. And for that reason, I would give it's like a good 7 or 8 out of 10 for me. It's not a 9 out of 10, which is what the internet kind of went around, agreed upon, really, with that one. So, yeah, I know you were rated it way lower.
Yeah, the game fucking sucks.
For similar reasons.
I tortured myself to finish it because I agree with you. Narratively, Rockstar did a great job with it, right? Like Arthur Morgan, one of the best, one of the greatest performances in games as well. Like some of the stuff he has to do at that actor in the end of the game is really hard when you think about the circumstance that character gets put in. But getting through the fucking trudging mud, and that is the aptest description for it, because that's what it feels like.
And I mean, the game starts in snow up to your waist. So
it literally starts in trudging fucking snow. That fucking might as well be a metaphor for the rest of the experience you're gonna have.
It's like, this is the first level now, not level, but this is the first area now where the snow is cleared. Why am I still feeling like I'm walking through snow?
Pretty much, yes, 100%. Yeah, that is very much my perspective on it. So, yeah, I did have that on my list.
That's my list, though.
Yeah.
What's yours?
Another one is Horizon. I just don't like the combat in that game at all. I think it sucks. I think it sucks that you have this character who is so based around ranged attacks, and the enemies you fight are so melee aggressive. They just charge at you, and you have no time to run away fast enough. They're really quick enemies as well. You have no way to get away fast enough, to move your shot, to aim it properly, to get the specific, because it's very much about precision, right? Removing pieces of armor and gear off of them. And I just didn't enjoy the experience of playing that game at all. It was just too frustrating. And that kind of just pushed me off.
Would you be interested in the sequel, or it totally depends on the build up to that game?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. It's not a day one game for me at all. Like it's one of those things I will wait for and see. But yeah, I can't deal with some of those aspects. Like there's other good. Like it's a gorgeous looking game. I love the world design and stuff like that. But it didn't speak to me narratively either. So. If long-time listeners of the podcast will remember my meltdown about this game, but Mario vs. Donkey Kong fucking sucks. That game is shit garbage. How anybody enjoyed that, I don't understand. I really don't. It may be it might be the worst game I've played talked about on this podcast,
Jeez,
pushed
wow.
myself to finish.
Wow.
Maybe. It was certainly the most angry I've been about a game.
I enjoyed that game.
You're a lunatic. It fucking... Like, remember, what was the analogy I used? It was like trying to eat steak with a spoon. That's what that game is, because that game
It's got like
requires...
automated platforming weird things.
Like it
weird.
requires such precise platforming, but the platforming is among the worst I have felt.
With Mario of all characters.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. God, that game sucks. It's so bad. And then another one recently that I haven't really talked about on the podcast this much, Destiny 2. So I played Destiny 2, and like I get the core of why people like Destiny and shooting things, but anything else around Destiny I don't understand. Like the world, and people are like, oh, I love the lore of Destiny, and I'm like, I don't know, man. It didn't seem very interesting to me in any way. And like the setup, the cutscenes seem very boilerplate, super sci-fi generic. There's nothing unique about it from my perspective. And this also kind of gets to maybe a crux of my problems with certain types of narratives, is like Horizon and Destiny are both sci-fi narratives fundamentally. And I just don't click with sci-fi narratives that much. I'm a fantasy person. So maybe that's partially the reason why, but like I don't understand people's love for the world and characters and lore of Destiny, because to me it is the most boilerplate, boring stuff.
It's interesting because Horizon has made me interested to try and get involved more in other sci-fi kind of stories. I mean, that's kind of one aspect where I am keen to try out like Death Stranding next year. I
don't know if you could call Death Stranding sci-fi or like what you would call it. I don't even know what.
Sure, I mean some have, but yeah, you're right. I don't even know what that game is, to be honest.
Nope.
I just want to kind of experience it. But yeah, any more?
Cool. I mean, I had Mario 3 on this list. We already talked about that.
Mario 3. I need to play that game.
No, you don't. Just ignore it. It's not worth.
I need to play that game so that every time we talk about Mario World and Mario Brothers 3, I can at least say I've played both as well. And it's not good.
Yeah, have a unified consensus. Finally.
Exactly.
That would be good.
But Ryan, thank you very much for that email.
Also, Octopath Traveler sucks. Fuck that game.
Still your number 9. I'm going to hold that.
It's alright. Yeah, it's fine. I'm
the day you
joshing.
die, it was your number 9 game.
I know. It's yeah.
But yeah, great email. And if you have an email that you would like to send to the show, please send to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. As I said, we are wanting Game of the Year lists. So that's games that came out this year. That's games that didn't come out this year. That's Nintendo games. That's non-Nintendo games. You can put them all in one list. You can do separate lists. You can do whatever you like. We'll have a look at them all and read some out on the show. So yeah, that'd be greatly appreciated. Catch us in the next segment where we're going to be talking about the Game Awards.
Alright everybody, welcome on back to the last part of the show, in which we are going to be discussing the Keeleys, the Game Awards, but you know, for those in the know, it's the Keeleys.
Going since 2014 now, is that right?
Yes, 5 years of the Keeleys, which is pretty good. You know, he previously did Video Game Awards, like on Spike TV and stuff, which was very driven by traditional TV media who thought they needed Samuel Jackson on these Video Game Awards, and like music performances. And like Jeff still does stuff like that, but it's more tasteful, I feel, right? Like he has the concert that comes and plays all the themes of like the Game of the Year nominees. He had that time when like it was like a band that played alongside Koji Kondo that was pretty cool. It's who does Radioactive? It was that band. I can't remember
I
what they're
don't know.
called.
I loved the Red Dead 2 medley last year. That was incredible.
Oh yeah. That was really good. So it's an interesting show because it is part award show, but equally people mainly watch it because there's announcements of new things. I imagine we're gonna get the next Smash character. Like, it seems a bit too obvious, so maybe we won't. But like, come on. For me, my prediction for Nintendo stuff is Bayonetta 3 and Smash, because they both have a history with the Game Awards. Bayonetta 3 was first announced at the Game Awards, and Smash Brothers, last year, Persona 5 Joker was announced as a character, first DLC character. So those are my two.
They wouldn't go Breath of the Wild 2 or Metroid Prime 4?
I feel like Breath of the Wild 2, they're still going to hold on until next year to show something proper for it. Metroid, no chance. They rebooted that game in February of this year.
Not been long.
Yeah, not long at all. So no chance of that. But anything you think might get announced? Anything you're excited to be talked about at the Game Awards?
Definitely Smash Brothers character. I can't see them going beyond that. Generally Nintendo in 2020 is quite strange. Like, we know about Animal Crossing.
Right, do you reckon we'll get any Animal Crossing here?
Doesn't
seem like the right show for Animal Crossing.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're more likely to get something else. I think there's some big games coming out in 2020 from Nintendo that we don't know about, so you might just see one of those, like a Pikmin 4. Let's go for that.
Yeah, that could happen.
Who knows?
We'll see. It'll be fun anyway, and we'll both be watching it apparently live now because of the election. But it's fun because I never stay up for election things because I'm not as invested in politics as Valley is. But hey, I'll get to see both things happen at the same time, I guess, which will be interesting.
What a fun night.
Yeah, my grandfather will be staying up for that because he always stays up for
because he loves the Game Awards.
Yeah, she loves the Game Awards. He wants to see if Devil May Cry 5 is going to take it or not.
All night, every year.
Oh, dear. Great, so let's kick things off. We're going to do Game of the Year last, but the way this works is we go through all the categories that we care about, I should say, because there's a bunch of esports shit that I...
we have no connection to.
Not only do we have zero idea about anything, but we just couldn't care less. Yeah. So yeah, we'll go down all the categories and we'll pick what we think will win and like a choice that we would probably like to win, let's say.
Yeah.
Cool, so let's kick it off with action game. Every year we talk about this, it's like... these games don't make any sense together, but whatever. So Apex Legends, Astral Chain, Modern Warfare, Devil May Cry 5, Gears 5, and Metro Exodus. Which, like, Metro Exodus shouldn't be in there. If you're splitting between action game and action adventure, Metro Exodus should be an action adventure, not an action.
That's the thing, like, action game sounds crazy as alone as it is, but then to have another category called action/adventure game is bizarre, because the action game they define as for the best game in the action genre focused primarily on combat.
Yeah, but like, you've got first-person shooters and third-person platinum games, right? Like, there's no cohesion.
The common thread is combat, apparently.
Okay. I guess that to some extent I understand where they're coming from there. Combat is the core focus of most of these.
Sure.
What do you think's going to win?
Oh, I think because Apex Legends isn't nominated in stuff like Game of the Year, I think this is a good category for it to win. And it is obviously first-person shooter, combat focused. So, and it was quite surprising as well, wasn't it? Like, it was quite... they kind of missed the boat to some extent in terms of what we were saying before about I've forgotten what even the format is called. Battle Royale. But I think the numbers stayed pretty good with Apex Legends, although of course there was a big drop off, and they kept going with content with that game, and I've absolutely loved it. So I'd probably expect it to win, and it'd probably also be my game I would want to win.
Cool. For me, I think Apex is going to pick up awards in like best ongoing game type stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
So my pick here would probably be... I feel like they're going to give the nod to Devil May Cry 5 because I think that there are other categories that game just doesn't appear in. And it was really fucking good. Like, that game is excellent. And if we're talking about pure action, like Devil May Cry 5, I think epitomizes that better than a lot of these games does. So I'm gonna say that. And then personally, I mean, I'd probably like to see... I'd like to see Astral Chain win something, because I do like Astral Chain a lot. So I could go either way with either Astral Chain or Devil May Cry 5. But yeah, I think both of those are more... For me, the category of action game shouldn't have shooters in it, but that's my opinion. So, you know.
There should just be a shooter category, but...
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird, because every genre is everything, and nothing's... yeah. I really don't agree with genre awards, but we still do them, apparently. Which is fine, because it just means that more things will win, but... A lot of the time, there are all these games that are just nominated in multiple categories, and it just gets a bit strange.
Yeah.
So onto action-adventure, we've got Borderlands 3, Control, Death Stranding, Resident Evil 2, Link's Awakening, and Sekiro Shadows Die Twice.
I think Control's going to win it, actually.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe Resident Evil 2, yeah. Who knows?
I think it's probably a toss-up between those two, for sure.
I mean, I don't see how... I mean, obviously Resident Evil is a remake, but I don't see how Link's Awakening could... maybe win this category. I don't know. That game is cool for its art direction. I think that's where I'd probably like it to win more so than this category. And then, like, there's a lot of overlap here between this category and the game of the year. So it's very weird for one to win one of those and another game to win another one. You'd expect the same game to win both.
Sure, totally. Because if it's the game of the year, how can it not also be the best action-adventure game?
Exactly. And I think Sekiro, Death Stranding, and Control are all in game of the year. So I think I'm going to go with Control.
Okay.
I'd probably like to see Control because I've heard good things about that game. And I think stuff like Sekiro is not my kind of game, even though I do need to try more games like it. And Death Stranding is just an unknown. Yeah,
it's just a fucking anomaly. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd probably pick Link's Awakening to win, but because I haven't played any of these other. But Control would be the game I think should probably get a nod. Like, if Control doesn't win Game of the Year, maybe that, like, you know how we talk about them spreading awards sometimes and things like that?
Yeah, this could be like the second place almost or something.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, Control's a good choice. Then we've got art direction. Control, Death Stranding, Grease, Sayonara Wild Hearts, Sekiro, and Link's Awakening. Interesting category, because, again, showing that the Game Awards are willing to put games on there from last year, because Grease was a December game from last year. So... nice that it gets represented here.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for the bolder art styles winning stuff like this, where when you've got like photorealistic games like Control, Death Stranding, Sekiro.
Like, I wish there was a distinction like Giant Bomb used to do with like best graphics artistic, best graphics technical.
Exactly. I feel like they're in here for best graphics when in reality it's... I don't know. It is confusing, as you say. I'd probably go with Link's Awakening just because that art style is gorgeous.
It is very nice.
I think it's got a chance of winning. Other than that, I think Grease is very cool. I'd like to see Zelda win.
Yeah, my pick would be Grease. I think Grease is a fucking gorgeous game. Like, incredible and amazing things they do with color in that game. I would like to see Zelda win. I think out of the big contenders here, Zelda is the one I think has the best chance of beating the big games. But that said, Sayonara Wild Hearts looks really nice. I need to play that game though. It's on my list at some point to get to. Then we've got Best Audio Design, category after my own heart. We have Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Control, Death Stranding, Gears 5, Resident Evil 2, and Sekiro Shadows Die Twice.
I can't remember which podcast was talking about this, but they sort of said the only time I think it might have been Patrick Klepek on Waypoint actually, so he said the only time you kind of think about audio design is when it's really bad, like when it stands out. And otherwise, good audio design almost becomes part of the background, you know. So
yeah,
I don't.
But you know, I pick up on things like that, like Link's Awakening. I don't know why Link's Awakening's not nominated for this, because I love the fucking tapping of his feet and the Pegasus boots, or like the way he bops enemies with his sword. Like, that is some of my favorite sound design. And I guess audio design goes beyond just sound design, but it is. I don't know. I feel like it's hard to distinguish a lot of these games because like guns sound like guns sound. Modern Warfare I think would be a bit of a shame to win because it's like, well, it's a Call of Duty game, the guns sound like the guns have always sounded.
But I think they would argue, fans of that game, or sound experts perhaps might argue that like the way that the sound reflects off like walls and things has evolved massively in the last few years, and that Modern Warfare is like the most modern version of that design. And if I've not played that game, I've not watched much of that game, but I've heard incredible things about the way that like explosions and bullets and deflecting off areas sound. And so I think that game might actually win just from what I've heard others talk about in that sense. Not that I've ever experienced it.
I think Resident Evil 2 could win this, because I think horror games, sound design is such a core tenet of that type of experience, right? Like, and especially when you got the big guy who fucking is lumbering after you the whole time. And I was watching Mark Brown's video on accessibility, and he was talking about how deaf people have a really hard time with Resident Evil 2 because so much of knowing where that character is footsteps and like sounds of where he's coming from.
I've played... I started getting in the habit of playing Apex Legends with my over-ear headphones on, like with the noise cancelling on, and the second I'm in like a metallic building, I feel almost like I've got a sixth sense where I know exactly who's where and what floor they're on just from the sound sometimes, and that's something that I don't get if I'm playing like with you online, where I've got like one headphone in and I'm listening to you, and it all becomes a bit mixed. So yeah.
I think Resident Evil 2 is going to win this. The only game I played here is Gears 5, so Gears 5 has pretty good sound design. I don't think it's going to win, but yeah, probably Resident Evil 2. Community support. So this is the game which is kind of best ongoing game. Although it's not, it says it's a game that has outstanding transparency and responsiveness, so I guess it's like the developers responding to fan demands and changes and requests and things like that, and like it very much is the Games as a Service award, but like a slightly different version of it. That's kind
of funny. They were talking about how could you ever have experience of all these communities, because all these games are like you play that one game,
be in that one game,
you have to be in that one community,
right?
And there's going to be very few people who have even played like more substantially played even more than 2 or 3 of these games, to be honest.
Totally. I think that the game that's going to win this, and the one that probably should, is Final Fantasy XIV. The reason I say that is because so many of these other games have had negative stories surrounding them, right? Of like people in the community being annoyed at something. Like Apex Legends had microtransactions debacles, and Fortnite has continued to be a thing where people don't like Epic Games, and Destiny 2 has gone through so much hardship. Haven't not that tuned into Rainbow Six Siege. I know people love that game, but Final Fantasy XIV put out an expansion this year that is like people calling it the best story in any Final Fantasy, mainline or otherwise.
Wow.
And people adore that series, and of course that game in particular had a tremendous turnaround. And I know you've still not watched it, Bally, but like one of the best documentaries that NoClip has done is their documentary on Final Fantasy XIV and the way they turned that game around. Just astonishing stuff. Really, really worth checking that out if people haven't seen it. But I would choose, if talking about community, Final Fantasy XIV is the game that should probably win this.
I don't know if I would claim to be part of the Apex Legends community.
Well, you know,
I like what they've done to that game, and I have like almost no experience on these other games. So yeah, Apex Legends for the win.
Okay, cool. Content Creator of the Year we'll skip. Esports coach, esports event, esports game of the year, esports host, esports player, esports team. All right, we're back in familiar territory.
Family game of the year. Here we go.
Family game of the
year.
Good
Good stuff.
Otherwise known as the Nintendo category for baby games. So this category is usually very Nintendo dominated. But like, here's the thing, man. Luigi's Mansion 3 gets snubbed, right? Like, this game should probably be on a Game of the Year list.
It should be.
It really
got
should.
A higher Metacritic than, like, Death Stranding, supposedly, and that's got in there. So, I mean...
I don't know. I think it's because it's a sequel that isn't necessarily doing anything new, but, you know, just Resident Evil 2 is a fucking remake, you know? Like, I see that there is... The thing that happens mostly is that if you're a Nintendo game that isn't a mainline Mario or Zelda, you're instantly put into this category that is you're not prestige worthy,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a certain category of prestige game where most Game of the Year candidates fall into, and if you don't fall into that type of category, you're never going to win Game of the Year.
Yeah, and this year especially, like I think Luigi's Mansion 3 and Fire Emblem
God,
Three
Fire
Houses,
Emblem Three Houses has been fucking
like,
snubbed. That
yeah,
game should be in Game of the Year. Like, it absolutely should.
like both of those games, I think surpassed expectation in terms of Metacritic and their Metascore, and really deserve to be like in at least one of them in that top echelon of Game of the Year. But no, they've just been plonked down here with all the other family games and the stuff like Yoshi's Crafted World, which is
like even putting Yoshi's Crafted World in the same category as these games is a bit of an insult. I'm sorry, but like that game is not on the same caliber of this other stuff.
Exactly, like it's not a good game in comparison.
But it's just like lumped in as if they're all the same, and it's like, no, it just isn't. It's interesting because like usually the family game category is dominated by Nintendo games, but in the past you have like an Overcooked thrown in there, or like an indie game that kind of also fits that mold. But the nominees are Luigi's Mansion 3, Ring Fit Adventure, Mario Maker 2, Smash Ultimate, and Yoshi's Crafted World. I think Luigi should win and probably will win.
Yeah, Luigi should win. I think I really want to play Ring Fit Adventure next year. I think that's going to be a whole lot of fun that we should both give a go when that comes down in price, because I don't think it's going to sell the best necessarily, but...
Totally. And also,
really
like,
cool.
I don't know, Ring Fit Adventure is not a game I put in a Game of the Year awards list. It's like, it's a different thing, right? Like,
it could be like Innovation of the Year or something, you know? It doesn't have to be family game.
Totally.
Mario Maker 2, we had a good time with that, but...
Yeah, Mario Maker 2 is the story of a game that, like, I thought I was going to spend so much more time with than I did.
Like, honestly, thinking about Game of the Year and my own personal list, like, and that game, it's just kind of like, where do I put this on my list? Do I put it on my list? Like, it's very hard in my mind, where the first game was so impactful, and we already said, like, it worked far better on the Wii U generally in terms of, like, the making aspect. It's a hard one to kind of talk about in these conversations. Yeah.
I also think that Smash Brothers might just win this because it's Smash Brothers.
If it doesn't get Game of the Year, which I think it's quite likely it won't, it probably win this one, you're right. But again, Luigi's Mansion 2 would get so snubbed if it can't get this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we have Best Fighting Game. We have Dead or Alive 6, Jump Force, Mortal Kombat 11, and Samurai Showdown, as well as Super Smash Brothers.
Maybe Smash could get this one then. You know, it's actually got 3 nominations.
It could do. I think its only real competition is Mortal Kombat, I'd say. And I feel like there's some negative sentiment around some of the tower stuff in Mortal Kombat with like grinding, and people weren't too happy with it.
And the fact that it's just come out on Stadia with lag.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's probably brought it back to people's minds in a bad way. So maybe that has an impact. I think Smash probably walks this category, like no issues. It also important to say
it's a bit of an outrage if it doesn't win, to be honest.
Totally. Yeah, but I mean, it's also important to say that games media votes on these awards. Majority of these games media outlets are UK, US, like English speaking based, but there are at least 1 or 2 outlets from like...
I remember Jeff making a point last year to reach out more to Japanese outlets, I believe, but they still make up a much smaller portion of the critical aspect of the game's press that they should in comparison to development.
Right, yeah, and like they have like one from France or a couple from Germany or like 3 from Italy and stuff like that. So each country within Europe is usually represented with some kind of site that's voting. And there's 80 media outlets, so you can think sometimes like if you have a good sense of the US and UK media landscape that you know what's going to win, but like none of us have any idea, and the majority outside, say like 30 of them are from US, UK. Yeah. The majority of those are from other places across the world. So a lot of the general consensus games might actually end up taking it, even if people over here don't like them as much, you know? So we'll see. Then we have everyone's favorite award, the Fresh Indie Game presented by Subway, because, we're going to have some fucking... I love that. Going to have some sponsorship involved in these awards. Love it, Keeley. Yes, look, man. Don't hate on Keeley for fucking doing this shit, because he's got to make money somehow, you know? He's got to pay for the glitz and glamour of these awards. So, interesting list, man. I'm struggle to think what's going to win here, but we have
really strange list, yeah.
Quite strong though, I feel. We've got Disco Elysium. We have Grease, My Friend Pedro, Outer Wilds, Slay the Spire, and Untitled Goose Game.
Here's the thing, like just what we were talking about a game that's talked about a lot in the media versus the best of these games. Like I think Goose Game's got a lot going for it in terms of all the media talking about it, but from what you've talked about the game and like other critics have talked about, Slay the Spire is just fundamentally a much better game.
Right, yeah.
But at the same time, Outer Wilds has also...
Outer Wilds is the game that will probably win this, I think. Like, I feel like Outer Wilds... Like, the other contender would be Disco Elysium. My case against Disco Elysium is that it came out very late in the year, so I doubt as many people will have had the time to commit to it, because it's like a longer game, and play through the whole thing. Whereas Outer Wilds has had this buzz for the whole year, and people have been saying, you got to play Outer Wilds, you got to play Outer Wilds. And people will have had more time to play that and stuff like that. So I think Outer Wilds will probably win. I'd like to see Slay the Spire take it, but...
How much do we know that the people judging these have actually played all the games, you know? Like, because if you're talking about judging a game just from dipping into it, stuff like Goose Game would come up the pile a bit, you know? Like, maybe for all the wrong reasons, where...
Well, like, they choose based on the people who are at those outlets. Like, people like Easy Allies and Kind of Funny, they only nominate things if they're in categories that they care about, right? So, like, they won't put a game for esports game of the year because they just don't care about that shit, right?
But if they wanted to, they could, and it seems weird that they would be able to, you know? That's all I mean. Like, how do you know all outlets are as...
But there is a rule that you have to have, like, at least familiarity, have finished, and have people who can speak to 3 games to nominate in a certain category,
that's
essentially.
Good. Yeah, that's good.
But then voting, and I guess voting ultimately comes down to whether you're able to nominate games into those categories. Like, I don't think that IGN gets to vote on esports a player or something like that. There'll be separate esports entities that will vote on those awards.
Sure.
Because they're separate. It's like a completely different thing. It's super weird when you talk about video games.
It's strange that they're all in one awards, to be honest, at all.
Yeah.
Like, it is
a little bit, but I think Keighley wants as broad an audience as possible for this thing, and so you have to do that. Then we have Game Direction, which is a weird award. It usually in the past was Developer, I think, or like Studio of the Year. But this one is kind of similar enough to the actual Game of the Year award, except it doesn't have Smash Brothers in it.
Yeah, it's weird because it's like for outstanding creative vision and innovation in game direction and design. So I guess it's like all the non-sequels, maybe, like.
But Resident Evil 2's on this list.
But then exactly, it's a remake.
Like, I don't.
It doesn't
understand
match at all that description. You're right.
Right, and so like game direction, like Kojima stands out obviously.
Yeah.
But also, if we're talking about creative vision and innovation, like, Sakurai is almost Kojima-esque in his control over Smash Brothers. So, like, how Smash Brothers doesn't get nominated for this, I don't really understand.
This might be the let's give Death Stranding an award because look how creative and incredible it is.
It's basically Keighley's, like, Kojima's my best friend award. Here you go, buddy. Which I've seen a lot of chatter on the internet about from ignorant people, I should say, who are like, oh, there's this conflict of interest with Keighley and...
I think kind of funny we're weighing up, like, does Jeff himself is he even one of the people, or is it purely...
No, he isn't.
Shipped out? He's not even one of the nominees.
He doesn't nominate anything. He doesn't vote on anything. He has no input whatsoever. The nominees and the votes. And sure, you could say there is a degree of conflict of interest in terms of, you know, he's promoted Kojima a lot. He's friends with Kojima. He's in the fucking game. And Death Stranding is a thing that if it wins, people are going to be skeptical about it. But ultimately, that choice will be based on the games press and not him. Like, it's nothing to do with...
He does pick the categories to some extent, right? And you know,
sure, he picks he does. Oh, like he comes up with the categories with a group of people. So, and in many ways, a lot of these categories are geared towards the AAA model, right? Like that's just kind of how.
Yeah, that's something we should mention. Is just how skewed towards the AAA. Like the bigger your budget, the bigger.
Yeah, it's like they like all these indie games. Let's just put them all in their own category of their own. Whereas to be frank, a lot of the indie games that came out this year are better than a lot of the AAA ones.
even if Metacritic, OpenCritic does give it mid to low 80s, you can still come in here and we'll welcome you, and that does feel a bit off at times.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's the ultimate problem with the video industry and the Game Awards, is that ultimately everyone is going to play the big games, and so those are the ones that are easy to put into Game of the Year nominations because everyone's played them. Whereas the smaller ones, probably better, don't get that attention. Anyway, the nominees are Control, Death Stranding, RE2, Sekiro, and Outer Wilds. Which, hey, Outer Wilds got on this list.
I'd like Outer Wilds to win from what I've heard about that game.
Totally. Yeah.
And as we said, I think Death Stranding might win it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I feel like Death Stranding is going to win it because people will see game direction and they'll be like, that means director. That means Kojima, the only name I know of these people. So let's get him. Then we have Jeff Keighley's SJW award, which everyone's like, all these assholes on Twitter are like, oh, it's the SJW award. It's like, fuck you people. You suck. Games for Impact, which never has any... It's like a game with a pro-social meaning. It's basically like... I think I said this last year as well, but it's like Keighley's leftist progressive award that will annoy assholes on Twitter, which I'm all for, to be honest. So fuck those people. Concrete Genie, Grease, Kind Words, Life is Strange 2, and Sea of Solitude. I've never heard of Kind Words before. That's one that is not on my radar.
I feel like Concrete Genie was a game that actually got quite a lot of promotion by Sony, especially in the UK. I saw it all over my Facebook and Twitter. And
well, here's the thing. Sony now owns Pixel Opus. They bought Pixel Opus, so that's a first-party studio, actually. It's a first-party Sony game. I feel like a lot of people are talking about Life is Strange 2 in terms of a lot of the way it deals with race and stuff like that, which is apparently well handled. Concrete Genie is more like bullying, almost like type of stuff. It's not going anywhere crazy. And then Grease is, I don't know, Grease like has a story, but
is it more art than social meaning? I thought.
Yeah, it's more art. But... It's more like it's an artsy game, right? That's the other part of this category. It's like Keighley just kind of throws games in here where it's like, artsy / I don't know, games which are tackling topics to some degree.
And Sea of Solitude, definitely from like a game perspective, didn't do great this year. But
no, like I don't think the actual video game part of Sea of Solitude was well received, but I think the actual narrative stuff people liked to some degree.
All right.
I think this is a hard one for me to call. I will say, because Life is Strange 2 is not done, I feel like it puts it down a notch in terms of the game's not fully finished yet. Whereas Concrete Genie probably is the one that has the most name recognition and will probably win. I'd love to see Grease get an award, even if I don't think Grease is the best pick for this particular category. But that would probably be my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think Concrete Genie sounds good. If it is reviewed a bit better, it's a sort of game I'd like to give a go. Might give a go anyway at some point when it's on sale.
Yeah. Then we get Best Independent Game, another category that just shouldn't exist, but, at the very least, it means that more games get the chance to get awards, so I'm actually fine with that. Baba Is You, Disco Elysium, Katana Zero, Outer Wilds, and Untitled Goose Game. I feel like Outer Wilds is going to win.
Yeah, again. I think Outer Wilds could get a host of a lot of awards, to be honest.
Yes, it could do.
Probably deserves them. I've not played any of these games apart from Goose Game, and I liked it a lot, but I think these other games, if I do play them, I might enjoy more than that game, so...
Yeah.
I don't know.
A Katana Zero, I would like to see win something, because it's incredible, it's really, really good, but again, I don't think it quite matches up to Disco Elysium and Outer Wilds, which will probably be leading the chase for Critical Darling from the independent community. We've got Best Mobile Game, which I guess, played
Call
some of these.
Call of Duty Mobile. I feel like that's not in the spirit of this category.
No. It feels very out of place in this category, like really out of place. So we've got Grindstone, which was people really liked a lot on Apple Arcade. Sayonara Wild Hearts, Sky, and What the Golf. A lot of Apple Arcade representation here. What the Golf is a game that I've played. that's the one I would probably vote for. But I think Grindstone will probably win from what I've heard people talk about in terms of, because for me, stuff like What the Golf and Sayonara Wild Hearts, it's better to play those on consoles. Like, you can play them on a tablet or on a phone, but it's not really designed for that. Like, they work, but it's better to play those as actual video games, whereas Grindstone feels to me like that's a mobile game made for mobile, and it's not really a thing that you can play it on a console, but it's made for that platform. So that's the one that I would vote for, probably, is Grindstone.
Sure. I mean, I don't know much about these games. What the Golf look cool. Let's back that.
Great. Then we have Best Multiplayer Game: Apex Legends, Borderlands 3, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Tetris 99, and The Division 2. Be hilarious if Tetris 99 won this.
I would love Tetris to win this category so much.
Yeah, I think we both would put our vote behind Apex Legends. Had so much fun with that game.
I think it's got a good chance of winning, probably.
Yeah, I think it could. But I wouldn't be surprised if out of nowhere Tetris 99 snuck in there and won. That would be very funny if it did so.
But it's Tetris.
I know. Hey. Narrative, we have A Plague Tale: Innocence, Control, Death Stranding, Disco Elysium, and The Outer Worlds.
Not played any of these.
Yeah, but I know Giant Bomb certainly won't be voting for Death Stranding as best narrative, because apparently that shit hits you over the head with its themes as subtly as a fucking giant crowbar. So I don't think I would throw my weight behind Kojima's like very, very ham-fisted metaphors. I think something like Disco Elysium or Control maybe could take this.
Yeah, I have absolutely no idea, so I'm going to pass.
No probs. And then we have Best Ongoing Game, which is like pretty much the same games as the community category. So I don't...
what's the point? Let's just do one category, like...
Yeah, again, like, it's probably Keighley being like, let's give more chances for awards, but... Yeah, Apex could win this, maybe, because it's been ongoing the whole year, and it's a new game this year, whereas all these are older games that are ongoing. But maybe that says more, that they're still ongoing, right? Maybe it says that Rainbow Six Siege has been going for, 4 years at this point, and is still tanking its way through, that it wins, so... Oh well. And then we have Best Performance. Anything? What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I was going to go with Apex Legends as well.
Oh, well, what a surprise, Bally. Really shocked by that one.
Shocked.
Best Performance, we have Ashley Birch for Parvati in The Outer Worlds, Courtney Hope as Jesse Faden in Control, Laura Bailey as Kate Diaz in Gears 5, Mads Mikkelsen in Death Stranding, Matthew Peretta as Dr. Casper Darling in Control, and Norman Reedus as Norman Reedus in Death Stranding. No, Sam Porter Bridges, of course.
Like, but then they've got a picture of him in the game rather than a pic.
I don't know.
Interesting, right?
It's messed up. They couldn't afford Mads Mikkelsen and Norman Reedus because they're real actors versus the voice actors on this list. Apparently, Mads Mikkelsen fucking crushes it in that game. You know, scenery chewing and all that nonsense. But, you know, he is, like, the biggest name actor on this list. So he's not really a voice actor. He's an actor. I think Laura Bailey is one of the best actors working today, just generally across the board.
She is in a lot of video games, isn't she?
Oh, she is. But she's also just, like, incredible as an actor. Like, you watch Critical Role and you just understand how insanely good she is. And she was fantastic as Kate. Like, I don't think it's an amazing performance in terms of, like, the writing is not incredible, but like Gears 5, I should say, is much better than I expected it to be on that front in terms of its narrative and all those things going on. And she does a good job leading it. I've played a little bit of Outer Worlds, and Parvati is like the first companion character you run into, and Ashley Birch does a really good job with her, and people seem to really like her a lot. So I'd say either of those two should win, but probably Mads Mikkelsen's going to win because he's Mads Mikkelsen.
Yeah, sure. Let's go Mads Mikkelsen.
And then we have Best Role-Playing Game. Disco Elysium, Final Fantasy 15, Kingdom Hearts 3.
Yeah.
And Monster Hunter World, Iceborne, as well as The Outer Worlds. I feel like The Outer Worlds will probably win. You know, it's nominated in Game of the Year, and it's the game that most people will have played that's an RPG this year. I think you need to be invested in communities and be invested in Japanese games to care about either Monster Hunter, Kingdom Hearts, or Final Fantasy.
Yeah. I still think there's a chance one of those niche ones could win it, just because if as long as all the outlets put that specific person who's into that community onto this opinion that they have to send back to Keighley, I think there's a chance that could win. But I do think the Outer Worlds is more consensus.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to win. Do you have any hope that Kingdom Hearts will win this award, Bally?
I think there's a chance. Let's see
right.
it. I think it could happen.
Okay, well, Kingdom Hearts is going to come up again because it is nominated in score and music alongside Cadence of Hyrule,
cool
Death Stranding, Devil May Cry 5, and Sayonara Wild Hearts. Yeah, very cool that Cadence of Hyrule got the nod, and you've played that. I just downloaded it yesterday because it was on sale.
Nice.
Yep. So I'm going to dig into that when I'm done with Pokemon. Get that done for the end of the year.
I think the soundtrack's the best bit of that game, Cadence of Hyrule.
I've heard some of it online. It sounds very the remixes seem real good.
Oh, it's really good. Gameplay wise, that game hasn't aged the best in my mind, but musically, it was incredible. I'd love to see that win this category. I don't know what will win.
I mean, I think Cadence of Hyrule and Sayonara Wild Hearts are the two games here that stand out to me because they are basically games based around music, those two games.
Yeah, but Kingdom Hearts 3 has Let It Go in it, so I think that
fuck off.
that might just walk it.
That's the best argument for me to say no, because that's just taking music from another thing. Come on, I don't need that.
I agree.
I think Devil May Cry 5 got nominated because it has one good song, but that one good song is fucking killer. Devil Trigger is awesome. I love that song so much. It does have other good music, but that's the song for Devil May Cry 5. And Death Stranding's here because who the fuck knows? I don't know. Just put Death Stranding in every category, apparently. I don't know. I'd love to see something like either Sayonara Wild Hearts or Cadence of Hyrule win. Probably Cadence of Hyrule.
I think Ben Hansen on MinMax now was talking about how is Super Smash Brothers not in this category.
Sure. It's kind of the same argument as Kingdom Hearts 3. Smash Brothers is just a compilation of music. That said, they do a lot of remixes.
And it's a remix of video game music, whereas obviously Let It Go is a film, so I don't know.
Sure. I get that. But oh well. Sports and racing game.
Snore.
FIFA, F1, Pro Evo, Dirt Rally, Crash Team Racing. I feel like Crash Team Racing is just going to win because most of the Games Press don't play any of these other games and don't care.
Yeah, I want Crash Team Racing to win just because it's a bit more colourful than this other lot.
Yeah, all these other games are made for just people who don't play video games, basically, versus...
I've heard good things about F1 2019. I think that might actually win. All
right, strategy game. Here's where you put our favourite games that don't get nominated in any other category.
I know.
So we got Age of Wonders Planetfall, Anno 1800, Fire Emblem Three Houses, Total War Three Kingdoms, Tropico 6, and Wargroove. Obviously, you know where both of us stand on these.
Yeah. I love that Wargroove has gotten into this category.
Yeah, it's good that it got a nomination.
Yeah.
For something.
I know so little about these games that aren't Fire Emblem and Wargroove, honestly.
Yeah, because they're the kind of strategy game that we don't have familiarity with. They're more grand strategy, they're more Civilization style games versus the tactics of Wargroove and Fire Emblem.
I think Fire Emblem will win though, actually. Yeah.
It's my vote and it will probably win, I imagine.
Definitely. I just don't think enough people will have played Wargroove to know that it is far superior.
Yeah, well, so VR/AR games is your category, Bally. We have Asgard's Wrath from Sanzaru, Blood and Truth, Beat Saber, No Man's Sky VR, and Trover Saves the Universe. Beat Saber probably the pick here.
Strange year for VR. It wasn't anything like as hot as last year. When Beat Saber actually came out. But yeah, I think Beat Saber will win this category, although Blood and Truth is a game I've been meaning to get to this year. It's sort of like a 5 to 6 hour proper FPS experience I'd like to try at some point.
Have you heard of Asgard's Wrath? I was looking it up and apparently it has a really high metascore, like 90 something.
Oh wow.
And Sanzaru did the Sly Cooper Vita game, I think I want to say. I think Sanzaru has some history with doing Sly Cooper stuff that Sucker Punch didn't do.
But one thing that is really frustrating about VR at this point in time is the number of exclusives between headsets. Like I have obviously on one headset in PSVR, but if you're an Oculus, then you get like that cool Darth Vader game and like this game. So
Vader Immortal, yeah, which Jeff Gerstmann was not that impressed with. I remember him like trying to mess around and slap Darth Vader in the face and stuff, and just wasn't doing anything.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But it is a frustrating time for VR because it doesn't feel very unified. It is lots of different companies with their own exclusives, and if you're an enthusiast, you really have to go for it and actually own multiple headsets, because I still think Astrobot is the best virtual reality game, to be honest, and that is obviously an exclusive, but it's not as high fidelity as Oculus, perhaps.
Totally. And then we come to the last category, game of the year, which is, I think, one of the hardest to predict in a long time.
It's crazy hard. Yeah. Crazy.
My pick would probably be Smash Brothers, because Smash Brothers. I just don't know, right? Like, there are people who hate Death Stranding. I feel like it's not going to have a unified enough support behind it. But like, so many of these games they feel like niche games. Like Control to some degree feels like a consensus game, but also I know people were frustrated with aspects of it. There are certain people who like Souls games who will vote for Sekiro. Resident Evil 2 was amazing by everyone's account, but it's a remake. Like, and do we want to reward that? And then The Outer Worlds seems like it's just a really good Fallout, and we've not had one of those in a while. So I really have no idea what's going to win. For the first time in a long time, like, the Game Awards Game of the Year is a little bit up in the air for me. Smash Brothers is interesting because you don't consider it a game for this year, because like the reason it's nominated is because it just got cut off last year. So it's a 2018 game.
Yeah, I mean, if Smash Brothers won, it would make Respawn feel better about Jedi Fallen Order for sure.
Yeah, and that's the thing we didn't mention, right? Is that there's a certain cut-off point, which was November 15th for nominees, and most of the games press did not get Pokemon or Jedi Fallen Order early enough in order to consider them for Game of the Year awards. Right. Which means that I think that Fallen Order would have probably had a better shot had it been nominated.
I think it would walk into this year potentially, like probably in place of, or who knows? I don't know, Smash Brothers or Outer Worlds probably, but
yeah, I don't know. I really like, gun to my head, probably Resident Evil 2, just as a consensus thing that everyone loved, because aside from it being a remake, there's not much you can criticize about that game.
Yeah, I'd like Smash Brothers to win. If Smash Brothers can't win, I'd like to see like Control win, because it's doing something different and isn't a remake, and isn't as controversial as Death Stranding, and isn't like Sekiro, where it's like iterating on an existing idea.
Sure, totally.
Same with the Outer Worlds to a degree, I guess, that Fallout comparison.
Well, Outer Worlds is like, it's a Fallout game basically.
It's a Fallout game, exactly. Yeah. So I think I'd like to see Control, because I always like to see innovation and good gameplay win. And from what I've heard, it's doing the best out of those in this category, probably. Totally. So it's a bit like, what was it? God of War beating Red Dead 2. Like, that made me feel good. So
yeah. I do question doing this segment sometimes, because most of the time the Game Awards is so dominated by things that are not Nintendo. Like, Nintendo just doesn't... There's a certain prestige, a certain type of game that the Game Awards is built around, and it is the types of game that are nominated in Game of the Year. And
it is the Death Stranding type of game.
It is the Death Stranding type of game. It's the reason...
It's got to have voice acting, cutscenes, normally third person, normally adventure style, often open world.
It's what Sony does, right? It's Sony's prestige game that always gets the spotlight, and it's because it's about budget and impressiveness and things like that. And
after Celeste making top like Game of the Year nominee, there's no smaller independent games. Although I guess Outer Worlds is kind of independent in a way, or am I thinking of Outer Wilds?
Yeah, technically. Well, not really anymore, because Obsidian was bought by Microsoft now.
Okay, so, but there's no smaller games. So I'd rather go on size than say independent. But
yeah, man. Like, God, I think Outer Wilds probably should have been nominated over Outer Worlds. I honestly think that.
Yeah,
I given
agree.
the conversation around those games,
definitely.
That's what it seems like should have happened.
And as we said before, Luigi's Mansion should really be in here.
Yeah. But again, if you look at Luigi's Mansion, like, it's kind of iterative. We know that it does more than just that, but ultimately it's just a very, very good one of those. So Anyway, interesting to discuss nonetheless and go through all of those games listed. Excited to see the announcements more than, who wins the awards, as usually the case with these things. But, we'll be staying up, so I'll just wait for us to talk about it after it's done. We probably won't talk about it after it's done, to be honest. I don't know.
We always run out of time because that's because we've got our own Game Awards to
yes.
about.
Now, here's the thing. If you missed the Game Awards on December 12th, don't worry. We got you covered. We got Game of the Year coming out of our fucking ear holes, man. And you want to hear it. So, Bally, what's the plan going forward for the end of the year?
We've got a big plan. So, we are currently recording episode 157. That will be out on Monday, the 25th of November. And then our first Game of the Year special will be out on Monday, the 9th of November, I should say. And our first special on the 9th of December. Did I say November? I meant December. This is going
really
well, isn't it?
Going
right.
Fantastically.
So, our first Game of the Year special is out on December the 9th, and that's a Monday. And that will be our top 10 games of the year that didn't come out this year. So it's in the good old TNL tradition. And then the second pillar we've got is on the 16th of December. That is a Patreon exclusive show. That is going to be our top 5 non-Nintendo games of the year. So everything that didn't come out on the Nintendo system, our top 5 of the year, a combined list. Exclusive to patrons on episode of TNL Ranks. That's coming out Monday, the 16th of December.
And that's for $2 and above patrons.
$2 you can listen to that show. And then the 23rd of December, it's the big one. It is the top games of the year. So this is Nintendo consoles. And we'll discuss a bit about the format because there's an aspect
we disagree about how many games we should be ranking this year.
Yeah, because we've played a lot of games that came out on Nintendo systems this year, so we'll see. We shall see. But that will be the top Nintendo games of the year on the 23rd of December.
Right before Christmas.
Right before Christmas.
Present for you.
To wrap up the year. And then obviously looking even further ahead, we got a good old start of 2020, got our predictions going for the rest of 2020, and we'll also look back on our 2019 predictions from the start of this year come January 2020, which is always fun.
Boy, so lots of stuff happening. Alongside that, I on my YouTube channel always do my own top 10 games, personal.
And I'm going to do one too. I did one last year.
Nice.
I'm going to do another one this year.
Sounds good.
So yeah,
I'm also getting to the end of my top 100 games of all time thing I've been doing on my YouTube channel, which, when that gets done, I'm going to put a giant podcast together and put that onto this feed. So that might happen before the end of the year. So you might get a 3.5 hour podcast, which is just my top 100, which it's interesting trying to put that together.
And on top of those 5 things we've just talked about, we're also into Rise of Skywalker coming out in December.
Oh God, we're going to do so many fucking podcasts.
We're going to have a spoiler cast for that. We might do one for Fallen Order. We might do one for The Mandalorian. Those are both in the pipeline as well. So it's going to be a big December on TNL. Look forward to it.
Absolutely. Great. Well, you can find the show, and to listen to all those, you definitely want to be subscribed to us in lots of different places. We are on Spotify, we're on Stitcher, we're on Apple Podcasts, we are still not on Google Play, they're not in our country. Fuck you, Google. I'll figure that out at some point. We're on Alexa. Say, hey Alexa, play This Nintendo Life. It can do it from TuneIn. It knows. It's sentient. We live in a world of robots now. Just get down with it. You can find, obviously, the show in various places, but you can find us all over the internet. Our Twitter account is at TNL Podcast, TNL Podcast, where we'll post all links to things that are coming up. Find me at LordNBZ. Where can they find you, Bally?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. It's the best place to go for all the stuff I'm doing.
Like building all that IKEA furniture, really sweating your back out there, Bally.
Like stalking pictures of MBZ in large crowds. It's very true. Fun. Very fun. I found them.
Nice, you did a good job there. And obviously, we would like to thank the people who have supported the show to help us get to where we are. Those are our patrons, Bally. Who are we thanking today?
Thank you to our 2 $10 patrons. They are my fiancée Caroline and Atari Alex. And thank you to all of our other patrons. Last week we put out an episode, TNL Takes, on social media.
Yes.
That didn't make sense. It sounded like we put out our episode on social media, which we did.
Yeah.
But the episode
promoted
was
it
actually
through social
about
media.
social media. There we
Yeah.
go. Right.
Yeah.
And as we said, come December 16th, it's the big one. It's the TNL ranks of top 5 non-Nintendo games of the year. So for $2, definitely want to check out that one as well.
Cool. And the email address should be the last thing.
The email address should be the last thing. And that is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. Send in your game of the year lists. Nintendo,
all of it, everything.
this year, last year, all the other years. Throw it in there.
Cool. Okay, well, I think that does this. This is a big fucking show. We've got some more big ones to go, but we enjoy doing these long shows. They're a lot of good fun. But we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time for some more. Until then, I don't know. Go and play a video game. Who knows? There's lots of them to play. It's too much. We're all drowning. Really, truly, just struggling for air up here. But it's worth it. Sometimes drowning is... I'm just going to say drowning's good. It's not. But anyway...
Swimming in video games rather
the
than drowning
episode.
in them. Yeah.
I don't know how to close out the show. Bally, thanks for being here.
Thank you, MBZ.
Thanks for listening, everybody. And I guess we'll see you soon. Goodbye. The musical interludes used on today's show were the Gym Leader battle theme from Pokemon Sword and Shield, copyright Nintendo 2019, and I'm going to be honest, it's just called Preview 07 from the Jedi Fallen Order soundtrack. There's no name for this song. I don't know what it is. You can look it up on YouTube. So yeah, anyway, copyright EA and Respawn 2019.
Catch us in the next segment when we're going to talk about the Game Awards, I should say.
Don't do that again. That felt like a very sloppy end to the segment.
I'll just say, right.
Yeah,
okay.
catch us next. Yeah, that's fine.
Catch us in the next segment where we're going to be talking about the Game Awards.
There we go.
Oh, so bad.
It's like, I can't let you just finish
How
like
many
that.
times have I been doing this podcast?
I
Like, right, there we go. Fumble into the third segment.
That's good. It's good.